What makes a good sequel? Some would argue that the only thing that matters is simply being a better game, regardless of where you take the story, the gameplay, or the graphics. There are many sequels out there that drastically change the entire foundation of its previous installment, sometimes to the point that aside from a few core details like the main character, it's a completely different experience. God of War 2018 could be seen as an example of this, a drastic shift in tone and core gameplay mechanics, a shift from a predominantly linear experience to a vast open world to explore, a story of chaos, power, vengeance, hate, anguish, destruction, a drool-inducing gore and fuckfest to widen the eyes of any prepubescent teenage boy, to a story of peace, responsibility, family, discipline, love, a tear-inducing epic that aims to teach you self-control, compassion, understanding, and every other trait that makes up a boring adult bursting with maturity. And although we can sit and scratch our heads as to why the fuck it can't just be called God of War 4 and remove the hassle of trying to look up material related to the actual first game, it's a fitting title, as it's a fresh start for both Kratos and the franchise. A game that was destined for greatness right from the very moment that Kratos uttered the words, "I am hungry," to which the masses of ravenous fans responded with, "Feed us." And what we were fed was a fantastic game that wasn't without its flaws. Now, although an overly passionate nerd piece of shit who focuses on irrelevant aspects of gaming culture, like God of War winning Game of the Year, might shove that very award in my face and say, "Read it, boy," it's important to look beyond that, to read every chapter and every piece of this game with your glasses resting halfway down the bridge of your nose and your chin resting on your thumb and pointer finger, instead of just skimming through its prettiest pictures like a child and using that as the benchmark for your judgment. When I was finished with God of War 1, as much as I loved its most intriguing aspects, I didn't see it as this full-fledged, triumphant victory for the franchise. To me, the battle was not yet won. What I saw was a great foundation for something that can be truly spectacular, a game whose sequel should not abandon a single piece of all the elements that made it so good, but instead fine-tune them. My thoughts going into God of War Ragnarok were echoed by Kratos' journey, seeking redemption, seeking conclusion. And considering the last time we saw Kratos, he was snapping one god's neck like a fucking toothpick and putting an axe between the eyes of another, there was still work yet to be done. I was vengeful for a better, even perfect version of the game that I knew the massive amounts of talent behind it could produce. And after 4 long years of waiting, with God of War Ragnarok, I can proudly say, my vengeance ends now. While I was playing God of War Ragnarok, there were multiple times where I said to myself, holy shit, this might be the best game I've ever played. And that's not because I got everything I wanted. Quite frankly, there were a few things I didn't want. It's because not only did it take everything that made the first game good and made it better, it took even the most minute flaws that might go over one's head or be forgivable if they weren't addressed, and took care of them. When small little inconveniences and slightly less than stellar aspects of a game, whether that be gameplay, story, or graphics, are surrounded by much louder, masterfully crafted ones, they're easy to forget and just say, fuck it, who cares? But this game is a shining example of what happens when the creators behind it are so passionate and dedicated to their craft, leaving no stone left unturned. It turns a great game into a masterpiece. So without further ado, enough beating around the bush, right? Let's do this! Let's tackle each and every piece of this game and its predecessor, or at least as much as I can handle writing without getting bored. Story, gameplay, graphics, etc. How and how much did they all evolve? Ah, the story. Sitting at the very top, the cherry of all the elements that make these games into delicious ice cream sundaes is the story. Sony just loves to throw that narrative-based action-adventure game genre in our faces, but how can you blame them when some of their big-budget exclusives are some of the best stories and acting performances in all of gaming? God of War is no exception. When it comes to the story of the first game, there's very little to complain about. So if that's the case, why does Ragnarok feel so much better, larger in scale, like a fully realized version of the first game? Before playing it, one would assume that it's just because of the concept of Ragnarok being the end of the world, or Kratos finally crossing paths with the likes of characters like Thor and Odin, who most people are all too familiar of. But it goes so far beyond that. So let's start at the beginning of the first game. We're presented with a much older version of Kratos, who settled down in another mythology trying to leave his gruesome and depressing past in Greece behind him. And poor old Kratos just can't catch a break and get himself a girl that doesn't drop dead before we have a chance to develop her character. We start off with a ceremonial cremation of his new wife, where his new son, Atreus, is preparing her for the cremation by lighting candles around her body. He does this so Kratos can very carefully lift her body off of the table covered with lit candles without prematurely setting her on fire or knocking over the candles and burning his house down. So he can then proceed to take her outside to place her upon a stack of logs all covered in snow and then light the entire fixture of said snow logs with one swipe of a rock to his axe, proving that even physics can't stop this game from immediately being fire. Now this isn't the issue at all, I just find it hilariously stupid. The issue is, not only do we never discover her cause of death, she's completely faceless and voiceless. And this is all setting up the core mission of the entire game, which is bringing her ashes to the highest peak in all the realms. So your entire journey's goal is to carry out the wishes of a character you've never seen or heard from, and it all falls on what she meant to Kratos and Atreus to give you that incentive to keep moving forward. And while it was still executed very well, I think we can all agree that if we had a more concrete basis for who she is as a character by actually seeing or hearing her, it would increase the urgency to do everything in our power to make sure Kratos and Atreus complete their mission. And this is something Ragnarok addresses by giving her a face and a voice. Through Kratos' dreams, we get to see the true state of their relationship and how they interact. Even Kratos holding newborn baby Atreus, which, shocker, brings way more depth to her character and his, and more of a reason to give a shit about what Faye means to Kratos, and also what Atreus means to Kratos, as with this flashback in Ragnarok, we see from the very beginning Kratos' hesitation to hold, even talk to his newborn son, in fear that with his influence he might turn him into a god-killing monster like himself, and also in fear that he may lose him, already knowing the pain of losing his family after accidentally brutally murdering them, which is what drove him down his path of god-killing in the first place. And this is the core theme that the first game is centered around, and thankfully it's the best part about the game, the relationship between father and son. You can feel the distance between them. As Atreus has grown up, Kratos to this point has never truly assumed the role as parent. But with his wife dead and his son not being grown enough to hold his own, he's now got no choice. He has to make this boy into a man, while at the same time struggling with the possibilities of what he could create, and also struggling with the fact that he's never divulged his true nature of him being a god to his son.
He doesn't know what you are.
And I would keep it that way.
This is of the utmost importance, to the point that because Atreus doesn't know he's a god, he's literally physically ill over it. Kratos is watching as the culmination of the fear and lies he's living with is literally killing his son. Now, admittedly, I did think it was kind of a weak plot point that just because a god doesn't know he's a god, he's fucking coughing up blood and passing out every time he has a temper tantrum. Imagine having to squeeze out a giant shit. Like, is every baby god just born ill because they can't understand a fucking word you're saying and has no concept of who they are yet? It's forgivable though, as it just serves as another driving force forcing Kratos to adopt a new behavior. Although some would rather him adopt a new son once Atreus finds out he's a god and acts like an arrogant little shit. I didn't have an issue with this either. I think it's also forgivable and funny. The bottom line is this entire plot point creates this intrigue at first of what Atreus is truly capable of as a god, and what will really happen to him if Kratos refuses to come clean. And it helps Kratos not only to try and build a deeper relationship with his son with a strong foundation of trust and compassion, but it effectively prevents Kratos from no longer continuing to run away from his past, and instead makes him face it head on, leading him to come to terms with the fact that despite how much he tries to hide it from his son and others, despite how much he tries to keep the memories of his past distanced from his own mind, inside of him, there will always be a monster.
I know.
Kratos is now beginning to truly accept that that fact doesn't need to be the sole thing that defines his character. And like I said, Atreus is the catalyst for that change in his behavior. And Ragnarok further establishes just how important Faye's influence is to Kratos' redemption, as we see her planting the seeds for the morals he's been trying to uphold since the first game.
We are not our failures.
We will be the gods we choose to be.
We are not who we were.
Who I was is not who you'll be. We must be better.
The only issue I have with this whole journey of redeeming Kratos' past and also his journey to finally being honest with his son is how casually he just blurts out that he's a god.
I'm a god, boy.
Really?
This was a moment I felt should have been way more impactful and just felt rushed and weirdly placed. At least Kratos still somewhat lied when he said he was born a god and that he only killed those deserving. But even the moment at the end where Kratos tells the whole truth and nothing but the truth, it just felt abrupt. After all this tension and importance surrounding Kratos coming clean, it just comes down to Freya going, "Tell your son the whole truth," and Kratos is like, "Aight." But once again, it's forgivable, as for the bulk of the game, the relationship between the two is the white sticky glue that holds everything together. We see Kratos over the course of the game become a more mature, responsible parent, trying to be a nurturing god, at times treating his son like a son instead of a warrior in training, slowly shifting from being a hard ass to giving positive reinforcement in his teachings and making things more lighthearted.
Yes!
Do not lose it.
Even taking lessons from Atreus about Norse lore and whatnot. And those little moments are the show stealers, when the tone of his voice changes and you see the love and emotion behind the cold and stoic brick shithouse. Especially moments like these, where the series for once actually drops all the serious tones completely and lets Kratos be happy. And Atreus, with his charm and kids gonna be kids attitude, helping to further break down that wall that Kratos has cast between them. He's smart, he's ambitious, he's curious, determined, and part of Kratos has to admire or at least respect that. This is a concept that is amplified in Ragnarok, as Kratos, no matter how hard he tries to be an overprotective soccer mom, like any good parent, there needs to be moments where you release the family shackles, hand over the key to the chastity belt, and let your kids shape their own destiny. And Kratos doesn't need to worry at all, as Atreus, already at such a young age in Ragnarok, consistently proves throughout the story that he can hold his own and also be responsible in his decision making, at least most of the time. The boy is indeed becoming a man. And in this sequel, he's doing so even with the absence of his father at times. But back to the first game. Like I said, the relationship between Kratos and Atreus is the glue that holds everything together, the core theme of the entire game. And while this isn't an issue by any means, as it's done very well, it's what holds it back from being as good as Ragnarok. Dare I say, they're not even on the same level. It's because with Kratos and Atreus as a unit constantly being the center of attention, you never get a different perspective that allows for all the great characters and story elements around them to be fleshed out more. All the side characters serve a purpose, and the issue is that purpose is always what they mean in relation to Kratos and Atreus. In Ragnarok, you are constantly getting new perspectives between every hour or so of gameplay, building deeper relationships with characters outside of the usual duo of Kratos and Atreus. You have Atreus and Sindri, Kratos and Freya, Atreus and Angrboda or Thrud, Kratos and Brock, Atreus with Odin and Thor even. And not only do you get so many different pairs to play around with in this game and flesh out their characters, there are multiple times when the main character you're playing as takes a step back to give the side characters their moment to shine. It only helps that the acting performances in this game are among the best that have ever graced a video game. All the characters have so much life and personality, all with different and unique stories and character arcs. And with this abundance of perspectives, you will constantly be wondering what's going to happen next for anyone and everyone. And this is what I feel is the #1 reason why Ragnarok is so much more satisfying. In God of War 1, you will constantly have a good idea of where the story is headed. So much so that we could have all painted the fucking prophecies on the wall at Jotunheim ourselves. You know that Kratos and Atreus are gonna make it to the peak at Jotunheim and release Faye's ashes. You know that Kratos is gonna build a better relationship with Atreus and reveal he's a god. You know the moment you see Baldur, Magni, and Modi that Kratos is most assuredly gonna kill these motherfuckers. And this doesn't put a damper on the story at all. It's just that everything is always headed in one direction, which as the player just has you waiting for those big moments and ever focused on the destination instead of the journey. Whereas in Ragnarok, you are constantly being led in different directions. You are constantly being presented with new prophecies, tonal shifts, and twists, which are all done so masterfully that you won't give the slightest fuck about the impending Ragnarok. You'll be hyper-focused on the here and now instead of what's off in the distance. But more on that later. Let me try and wrap up some things with the first game. Mimir is literally perfect. So much so that he's not even worth going into much depth with. If you've played these games, you'd know that there isn't a single pointless thing that comes out of his mouth. I talked about Kratos and Atreus being the glue of the first game, but what would that glue be without the glue that makes the glue glue? Which is Mimir. Whether it's his stories to help pass the time in between story progression or his thoughts on the main story as it's happening. He's just a big bundle of charm, humor, intelligent insight, etc. And there isn't a single tone where he feels out of place. An absolute masterclass performance. Baldur, the main villain, is somewhat of a controversial topic of discussion depending on who you talk to. On one end, you have his introduction with Kratos, which in my opinion might be the best scene in the whole game. It's certainly the best fight in the entire game. There's so much intrigue and mystery surrounding his arrival, his identity, his invulnerability. Who is the stranger? And then poof, it's all gone for hours. Only to have it all wrap up in the final act of the game. The lack of his presence hurts him. I don't care if he's being brought up in conversation. The fact that he isn't really leaving his mark anywhere, creating new reasons to give a shit about him throughout the game, keeps him chained to the concepts of his character. To the point that it feels like he's just waiting patiently for us to come and snap his neck. He's a henchman for Odin. Okay, in Ragnarok, Odin says he's his best tracker, yet he can't track someone down that's literally 3 feet away from him. He's a bit of a crazy lunatic asshole. Okay, that's great. Can we see more of why that is, aside from just the subtle reveal of him being Freya's son in Helheim? He's got invulnerability. That's easily taken away through no effort from Atreus and Kratos, because Freya can't see the bright green fucking mistletoe arrow on Atreus' chest. She even spends an extensive time alone with Atreus, while Kratos fetches his Chaos Blades and goes to Helheim to retrieve the heart. She's got all the time in the world to remove the mistletoe arrow and fix the fucking quiver herself. And the ridiculousness of that is even further heightened by the fact that in Ragnarok, she can spot Atreus wearing that very arrow on a necklace under his shirt and under the fucking vine she's wrapped around his neck. All of that stupid shit makes Baldur feel just like an obstacle to overcome, which makes the final moments of the game with him and Freya, despite the good acting performances, feel like I'm Baldur, where I can't feel any of this. Mostly on a first playthrough, as the more I revisit Baldur's cutscenes, the more I like him, and wonder if I'd love him if he had gotten more screen time. He's got reasonable motives, some intriguing concepts, some great acting. It's just that it's all too one note and too spread out in a first playthrough that some of the impact that could have been just isn't there for me. As far as Magni, he's even more worse off. Literally just there for the boss fight and to get an axe to the face. Modi gets a little character though, and it gives us a little background on who Thor is as a character, getting his bitch boy ass kicked for losing to Kratos, blamed for his brother's death. He also serves well in playing with Atreus' rage and getting him to stab him in the neck and kick him off a cliff, which leads to a great scene with Kratos and Atreus. I only wish Atreus really did suffer some consequences for killing him in the second game. A few Mjolnir smacks in the face would do justice. Alright, so, I'll cover the other side characters as they come up in my thoughts on Ragnarok. Rest assured I haven't forgotten anything or anybody, but it's fucking Ragnarok time. Right off the bat, I love how we start off with a bang. Freya attacking Kratos, basically filling us in on what Kratos and Atreus have been up to the past couple years, which is dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodging this crazy bitch. With all the rushed and admittedly melodramatic death of Balder and her reaction of it out of the way, I was so ready to see this rage-induced, bloodthirsty version of Freya. The cries of anguish and hate she lets out, along with that epic was music to my ears. It immediately set the tone for me, like holy shit, we're gonna get acting performances that somehow managed to be so much better than the already great ones from the previous game. Sign me up. And that trend continues for the next hour of gameplay, as it's already filled with such fantastic writing and acting. The dialogue between Atreus and Kratos as they argue back and forth seems so much more grounded and relatable. They feel like real people arguing instead of fictional characters.
You've already taught me discipline. I need more than that. I need answers. Answers you don't have.
Answers only your mother had. Answers she withheld.
Atreus is trying to prepare for the upcoming Ragnarok, while Kratos only wants to delay the inevitable and keep him safe. Enjoy the time left he has with his boy. He hasn't told him of his prophesized death on the wall at Jotunheim. This is one of the many instances where themes from the first game are bleeding into the second. Once again, Kratos is keeping secrets from Atreus, and Atreus to him, creating distance in their relationship where one can never truly understand the other. Speaking of callbacks, I love the callback to Atreus' line in the first game after being told he's a god.
Can I turn into an animal?
And then literally giving him the power to turn into fucking animals when he loses control, which leads to Kratos nearly killing him. I also love how neither Kratos or Atreus ever bring it up. It's just there for the people that remember, the super fans, the nerds, like you, not me. After Kratos and Atreus get their bearings about them and Kratos decides, fuck all this drama, I'm hitting the sack, Thor arrives at their home. And I love that the cutscene is exactly the same from the teaser we got in the first game of this exact event. I was literally losing my shit when this happened. I also love how this visit from Thor at Kratos' home mirrors the visit from Balder in the first game. Right at the beginning of the game, starting off somewhat civil and then ending in an epic fight. Both starting with an uppercut to Kratos doing damage to his roof. It's identical even down to the way Kratos recalls his axe at the end of the fight. Just one of the many moments reinforcing the thought in my head of this being the first game, but bigger, badder, and more exciting. The way they set both of their weapons down, the way Atreus sets the glasses on the table, the calm and reasonable demeanor of both men, while being fully aware that they can literally blow the roof off this bitch when the time comes. It's like this is Godfather of war. And Odin playing into this theme shows up as like, here are the issues, I'm gonna make it short and sweet. Calmly showcasing his authority, subtle things like the way he says,
"You know who I am?"
or drinking from both cups of mead. The little mannerisms from Kratos as soon as Odin motions towards Atreus, him immediately grabbing the axe. There's so many little nuances that make this scene perfect. Also a fantastic line from Ymir when he says, if he tells you snow is white, he's lying. Just perfectly setting up Odin's character. He offers a truce. You don't fuck with his shit, he won't fuck with yours. Kratos declines. And we get the fight we've been waiting for, as Thor rightfully says,
About time.
It's here where Thor showcases his love for ass beatings, having all the craziness of Balder minus the loony buffoon aspect. Balder was on crack, but to Thor, fighting is crack. Constantly egging Kratos on, trying to get him to bring the dormant, blood-soaked Spartan general out in the open. While Kratos is all like, well, you're a bad father. You should have given Modi a cookie and read him a bedtime story after he watched me axe murder his brother. In ways, they are both at different stages of the same journey, on a path of ditching their barbaric nature for the sake of being role models for their children. This is great foreshadowing for Thor's character arc throughout the game. And when Thor gets him to bring out that Spartan rage when mentioning that Odin has plans for Atreus, it's great foreshadowing for Kratos' character shift throughout the game, and him having to learn that nothing, even the safety of his own son, is worth clouding his judgment and slipping back into his old ways. This is also the first of many examples throughout the game of the fantastic writing making a character's quote-unquote wrong decisions seem just as intriguing as the right ones. Because who isn't watching this situation unfold and begging for Kratos to lose his shit? Who isn't waiting for Kratos to say, you know what, fuck redemption, and then the old music kicks in, dun dun dun, dun 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 dun. Anyways, after a stiff Spartan punch to the face, Thor just walks it off, even rips a loosened tooth out of his mouth, and tells Kratos that his blood debt has been paid. He can respect Kratos' power, so much so that it's not even worth avenging the death of his own sons. Now I'm sure maybe Odin didn't want him to full-on kill Kratos because that might throw a wrench in his plans for Atreus, but I still see this as Thor acting on his own volition. So from here on out I'm going to be all over the place, because if I go through the entire story piece by piece in order, I'll be writing this until the next game comes out. Like I said before, and will probably repeat another 1,000 times, this game takes you in so many different directions, while slowly building a bigger picture for each of them. This could be character arcs, different artifacts like the giant marbles or the mask, the many prophecies this game plays with, even aspects of the gameplay like when you get to control Atreus, like oh shit, are they gearing us up for Kratos' death? Everything keeps you on your toes thinking, so let's go through some of them. A lot of this game is centered around prophecies, always giving us subtle hints of where the story can go, where our beloved characters will end up. You have Atreus' perspective, who's eager for answers to use to his advantage, and if not fully embrace them, at least use them as a roadmap to guide them in the proper direction, whether that means bringing about the foretold future that serves them, or going against the aspects that don't. Kratos, being all too familiar with the chaos that can come with such knowledge and playing with fate, naturally wants to erase them from his mind, to not let them dictate their actions in any way. His whole family lineage in Greece were driven by fear of prophecy becoming reality, with all their attempts to go against it only leading to it coming true. This game does a great job of reinforcing those story elements from the original trilogy. This is exactly how Odin is behaving, living in fear of prophecy, doing everything in his power so he can prevent Ragnarok and his possible death, seeking the truth, seeking answers. And because his goals align with Atreus's and both have a good reason from their individual perspectives behind them, it feels natural that they should work together. Once again, here we are getting good reasons to believe what we think might be bad is good, making you cheer for Atreus to make the quote-unquote wrong decision and break free from the clutches of his father. The scenes where Kratos is scolding him amplify the tension between the two.
But what if Loki going to Ironwood is the only way that...
Atreus, my son, and nothing more. Do you hear me?
The fact that they are both in some way right and both in some way wrong makes things so much more interesting than if Atreus was just making dumb decision after dumb decision and it just becomes a story about forgiving him for being an idiot or forgiving Kratos for being an asshole dictator, assuming Atreus was always in the right. On Odin's side, the game does a great job of not painting him as a clearly disingenuous prick. Even things as simple as seeing Asgard for the first time. Behind the massive wall surrounding the city, you're expecting this palace befitting of a king, the All-Father. You expect a lavish lifestyle with statues and monuments praising his gloriness, 2 10 out of 10 knockouts massaging his feet with Asgardian oil and feeding him a fucking grapevine. But it's just a giant village filled with cabins and some good weather. Odin's palace is just a giant lodge cabin with nothing crazy or extravagant tied to it. Loki gets his own room, is free to come and go as he pleases, even gets some gifts in the form of books and a talking sword, because Atreus is a fucking nerd. And Odin gives them with an attitude that doesn't suggest, hey, I'm a condescending piece of shit. It makes you question whether or not the heinous acts committed by him were truly that of pure evil. That there's more to the man beyond the stories you've heard of him. It only helps that he maintains this calm and chill demeanor throughout a majority of the game, and his interactions with Atreus always feel genuine and harmless for the most part. Now this is probably because he can kill Atreus in 2 seconds and because he's Tyr in disguise, so any information Atreus relays to the gang he will know of, and can also try to lead them in whatever direction he sees fit if the situation calls for it. But we don't know that at this point in the game, so it feels okay to trust him. You won't mind helping him to find the missing pieces of the mask, as the situation sometimes feels less of Atreus just being an outright spy or with clear intentions to use the mask as a weapon against Odin. You'll be just as curious as them. And again, back to prophecy making shit all the more intriguing, as we're seeing all this kinship with Atreus and Odin's family, knowing the fact that his name is Loki in all the prophecies, who is the son of Odin in Norse mythology. And this game takes it a step further, with Loki discovering the entirety of his shrine, ending with him serving Odin. Angrboda trying to cement the idea that all these prophecies come true no matter what. With this idea coming from someone who clearly isn't being deceptive, we have no reason not to believe it. The state of the relationship between Angrboda and her grandmother, how she sees beyond the monster that she's become. It presents an idea to the player, and to Atreus, that despite how sinister and evil something may appear on the surface, it could perhaps be misunderstood. Once again, is Odin really that bad of a guy? Is serving him really us turning to the dark side? And it helps that while Atreus is being presented with these ideas, it's in a beautiful and peaceful setting, a far cry from how the other realms have been affected by Ragnarok. It's here that he learns to control and channel his rage abilities, is provided with a new purpose in life with the giant marbles, and proclaimed the champion of the Jotnar. Is given a chance at a possible serious relationship with Angrboda. It all just feels like freedom and prosperity. Throughout the time we spend with her in Ironwood, we are consistently given more reasons to be invested in Atreus' future. And that future is specifically one without Kratos. Now we're not only getting reasons to believe in prophecy, but we're getting reasons to want to believe in it. And just to wrap up the prophecy stuff, when Kratos visits the Norns, the new Sisters of Fate of the Norse realms, we're given even more reason to believe as they predict everything he, Freya, and Mimir will say. They predict that Kratos will indeed die. But the key word is predict, not know, predict. As the Norns subtly mention that nothing is written, there is only the choices you make. It's just that they're so predictable. This is such a strong evolution of the first game, with, like I said before, how clear as day the path before Kratos and Atreus was. Here the game is not only giving you a plethora of possibilities, but it's doing a fantastic job at making sure the ones you would think are guaranteed seem impossible. Now one can say, well, I assumed Kratos would die after seeing his foretold death in the first game. But with how arrogantly certain the Norns told Kratos it was happening, it gives you what you think may be clarification, while at the same time it could be giving you the clarification that he won't, defying his fate.
I enjoyed your story, Kratos. Pity it has to end so soon.
After Atreus sees Kratos' foretold death in Ironwood, his priorities shift, and he starts trying to sway Angrboda's beliefs in prophecy that already seem cemented in her mind, no matter how much the evidence points to her original beliefs being correct. The fact of the matter is, like the Norns said, they are all just the sum of their choices and behaviors, and these are things they can change. This carries on throughout the remainder of the game, as Kratos and Atreus learn to not let their foretold fate define their actions, even when they line up exactly how it was written. Atreus accepting that he has to continue making noble decisions even if they supposedly lead to Kratos dying, ignoring prophecy completely, cracking the mask in half, denying himself and Odin all the answers they sought after. Kratos, just like the first game, confronting his past head-on in a positive way, no longer resisting the possibilities of war and Ragnarok, as he goes back to his roots, leading an army to Asgard as their general. Now fighting a war for peace and freedom instead of vengeance and power. Coming to terms that this may indeed be his last stand, and more importantly, the time to let go of Atreus, and finally put the fears of him not being truly ready to rest. And he does, but without dying. He does defy his foretold destiny. But then in the end, he sees a shrine of him thriving as a beloved god, which means it was never his fate to begin with? This was a fantastic moment for Kratos' character. It needed to be in this game, though it does kind of shit a little on the whole concept of being a fate breaker. But while we're on the topic, I love how the concept of Kratos being a worship god in the most positive sense imaginable never seemed like it was the true goal throughout this new chapter in this series. That with his foreshadowed death in the first game, this was all setting him up to die and for Atreus to take over the franchise. But by the end, it feels like this is the only way it should have ended up. When Odin had his chat with Kratos and mentioned realizing he had never been that basic concept of what a god is to people, I was like, holy fuck, you're right. I never thought of it that way. Kratos never thought of it that way. He journeyed to these Norse lands to distance himself from his past, to start doing the noble thing, not with the intention of being seen as noble, maybe not even to himself, but simply because it was the right thing to do in his eyes. See, yet another example of not trying to define yourself by what could be in the future, and at the same time in both games, not being defined by your past. Great writing. Okay, so the marbles that contain the souls of the giants, finding out they weren't killed but instead hid their souls away. Again, this game is just chock full of great moments building upon so many pieces of the story from the first game. Some, like this one, that quite honestly could have been left unaddressed or just tucked away in side content or random dialogue. Even though it seems like a major thing, like how did the giants die? This game just has so much shit to take in on the main story surface. It's just fucking nuts how they managed to juggle so many different things and not have any of them feel boring or small. And in fact, amplify their importance to massive scales. Not only is the fact that the giants were never killed and instead put their souls into marbles cool and unexpected, but it's an integral part of Atreus' character and the entire game. Like I said, it gives Atreus a purpose beyond life with Kratos, and it's not the type of purpose that's just a cliche, you're the chosen one, so do this story, because then there would be no reasonable incentive for Atreus to carry it out, and the entire time you'll be thinking, enough with this giant shit, protect your father, protect the 9 realms from Odin's tyranny. It's all about fulfilling the wishes of his mother, honoring her memory. She wanted Kratos to venture with him to Jotunheim and see the history of her people, to discover his gianthood. This is the woman that raised him from infancy, while Kratos was still just trying to be a stoic, depressed badass. But Kratos himself even acknowledges that the shrine they see in the first game isn't their story, it's his. He's got all the reason in the world to accept the duties being handed to him, quite literally. Which again, to go back to his arguments with Kratos throughout the game, makes his perspective valid. And the marbles and the giant magic provide an even bigger connection to his character as he uses them to pass souls into animals, building upon his ability from the first game to be able to feel what they're feeling, his compassion towards them, the fact that he can shapeshift into one. With the guidance of Angrboda, he creates the World Serpent, tying in the tease from the first game of the serpent telling Mimir that Atreus looked familiar. And that new World Serpent indeed fights the God of Thunder in an epic battle, fulfilling the prophecy of being knocked back in time by Mjolnir. And we get an epic view of that fight, from a few miles away with not much cutscene tie-in. But I'm being a spoiled little brat, aren't I? Admittedly, I wish we got more of the World Serpent in Ragnarok, as I'm sure for many like me, he was one of the main attractions of the first game. But moving on. Even before Atreus makes it to Ironwood, at the beginning of the game, he unknowingly uses giant magic on his dying wolf Fenrir to pass a part of his soul into his knife, and later into Garm, creating the cutest gigantic puppy the world has ever seen. And yes, I said part of his soul, because if you pay close attention to those soul balls, it seems that our beloved puppy might be meeting a grim end in a future game. But this scene serves as a heavy dose of foreshadowing, coming full circle from beginning to end with Odin's death. By the end, he finally, fully reveals the selfish, manipulative asshole side of him, his true intentions, aiming to only protect himself no matter what lengths he has to go to do so. And among those is even killing his own son, Thor, after he decides to follow Kratos' example and no longer just be a destroyer for the gods above him. This showcasing that in a way the evil nature surrounding Asgard and its people has all just been stemming from Odin's influence. And even after Odin is exposed and essentially finished, he continues to try and manipulate Atreus, telling him how the mask was their chance to make the 9 realms better, blaming all his heinous acts and the war on others instead of taking some responsibility. And Atreus, knowing that with the proof in the form of his father, of Thor, of his own actions when he broke the mask, that their nature, while predictable, can change, and he tries to pass on the lessons of his parents onto Odin, telling him that he can be better, he must be better. And Odin refuses, saying he will never stop, staying true to his predictable nature, thus sealing his fate. This scene echoing the original prophecy of Kratos' death, having him in the arms of Atreus with his soul leaving his body, only to have it be Odin in the end, and that same prophecy had Thor standing over Atreus and Kratos, and in the end it's Kratos standing over Atreus and Odin, and Thor is dead. We are still using every tool previously used throughout the series in spectacular fashion. Family slaughter, abusing power and acting on impulse, succeeding and or failing to change your ways, prophecies. Like Angerboda has said, these prophecies have a way of eventually coming true. You just wouldn't think it would do so while changing which people are affected by them. Wow. Holy fuck, I think I'm starting to regret trying to cover every aspect of this story. But I can't end this without talking about my two favorite story beats and Freya. Freya's story in the first game mainly serves as a parallel to Kratos, like hey, we both have shitty relationships with our sons, so let's be friends. It's something that's a common thread in both games, where everyone has at least one common issue and are all handling it in different ways. The big one is parenting. While you could say Freya is initially helping Kratos and Atreus out of the kindness of her heart, it's also her way of coping with the state of her relationship with Baldur. Like if I can't mend my own relationship with my son, I can at least try and pay forward the lessons I'd give to myself onto Kratos. And she does. She introduces them to realm travel, helps them get past the black mist on the mountain, etc, etc. She's the sole reason Atreus is still alive after he had a huge burst of Spartan rage and poopied in his pants. But like other characters in this game, it's all fun and games and my guidance and lessons hold true merit until you murder my family members, and all those lessons foregoing violence go straight out the fucking window. Kratos is trying to be all holier than thou, only succumbing to god killing to protect Freya and saying the cycle ends here. It's gonna be all peachy after I snap your neck. And Freya is like, yeah, no.
I will rain down every agony, every violation imaginable upon you.
Seeing as she saved Atreus from poopy pants syndrome, I think it's only fitting that the violation be permanent constipation for Kratos. But in all seriousness, I love how when they eventually cross paths and swords midway into Ragnarok, she repeats the line to Kratos.
Every agony, every violation imaginable.
And it's telling just how aware she is of him not wanting to kill her that she has to wear a disguise just to get him to fight. She knows deep down that Kratos is being understanding, while she's just refusing to understand the reasons for his actions. You stuck-up goddess bitch. But like I said, I yearned for a reason to be invested in Freya's anger. In the first game, I was like, could you be any more melodramatic about a character nobody cares is dead? And while she does still flex that melodrama in a few parts of her performance, because of the way she's expanded upon in this game, it's now an acceptable character trait. With deeper dives into her past, she does come off more and more like a quintessential goddess that was worshipped and looked up to. So being a little pretentious and stuck up is part of the territory. While we got little glimpses of her past in the first game with her inability to travel the realms because of Odin and Mimir's stories, we never saw them coming directly from her. But now we get a whole main story and side mission dedicated to that past, even further establishing Mimir's character with his past connection to Freya and Odin, how he brought them together. And along the way, Kratos tries to bring Freya to a new level of understanding with his past, how he murdered his wife and child so he knows what it's like to lose family and let rage consume you. About his brother Deimos, who I don't know much about because I didn't play the handhelds, but how he hated Kratos. He knows the anger Freya feels for her brother Freyr all too well. This whole mission in Vanaheim is one of the many great examples on how different pairs of characters help you get far more invested in other stories, instead of it all just happening in a single cutscene, or Atreus and Kratos saving Freya from whatever it may be just so they can shake hands real quick and brush the bad times under the rug. It gives you time to ease yourself into Freya's perspective and Kratos' attempts not to force a rekindling of the relationship, but just to show that he meant it in the first game when he said he wouldn't forget what she did for Atreus. That with that, he'll do everything in his power to make sure Freya gets closer to those roots.
It's still in the way! I need to get to those roots!
I know!
And speaking of them roots, I love how the scene with Freya ripping them apart gets so much time to let the emotion set in. What was once a story tucked in the background of her history with Odin is now directly in the forefront, ripping away the tiny little roots that took form in the first game to plant the seeds of truly strong character development. And even after Kratos has just put his life on the line, slaying a beast just to ensure Freya's freedom to roam the realms in peace, he still leaves his fate in Freya's hands as to whether to try and kill him or forgive him. He doesn't even open his mouth. It's Freya who points out the choices. It admits that she doesn't think she can do either. Just a phenomenal performance. She subtly apologizes to Kratos for being a vengeance-driven bitch, as he says there's no need to explain her actions to him of all people, repeating the exact line she said to Kratos in the first game.
When last we spoke, I was...
No. You were right to distrust the word of a god. No need to explain. Not to me, not for that.
And that he will never regret saving her life. But it was wrong of him to rob her of the choice between life and death with Baldur, and it's something he will never do again. I'll revisit that in a second. I just want to briefly touch on the interaction with her brother. He's a little pissy because she went and married the leader of the clan that burned him alive in his attempts to broker peace. Understandable frustration. And his time spent without her for so many years has further cemented that frustration. It's been years since Freya has visited her homeland, and she reminisces during the Vanaheim mission with a nice, literal bird's eye view of how fucked the realm has become. A far cry from her childhood memories of it. But anyways, they have an adorable cutscene where she scolds him for drinking on the job and never taking shit serious enough. I can relate. And then Freyr says, "Abandoned you? I mourned you," and then puts his hand on her boob. Now, I'd love for this to be a customary love greeting in the real world, but with siblings it seems a little weird. Anyways, this scene is yet another example of, like I said before, how main characters taking a step back gives the side characters a lot more purpose and intrigue. It gives Freyr some emotional depth, so he isn't just the carefree gets stabbed and then says, I'll walk it off, too cool for school guy. It makes his sacrifice at the end so much more impactful. Okay, that's a lie, I didn't give a fuck. But that's not his fault. There's so many moving pieces in this story, all being done, quite honestly, too well, that sometimes things have to take a little bit of a backseat. But the moment we find out that Odin's talking sword is his was maximum fucking cool. One thing I'd like to touch on is how ironic it is that Freya was so keen on making sure Kratos and Atreus followed a path of peace in the first game, only for her to be the polar opposite in Ragnarok, even after her and Kratos started burying the hatchet. She's more focused on trying to start a war with Asgard than anyone, even flat out telling Kratos that her assistance in trying to help him rescue Atreus from Odin's clutches is just a means of removing distractions in his head.
Freya, thank you for your help. I know this was not your focus.
The sooner we find your son, the sooner you'll be able to focus.
Fast forward all the way to the end, where Freya has not only fully rekindled the relationship with Kratos, but also fully rekindled the relationship with her nobleness, to not need the pain and suffering and eventual death of Odin to make her whole. Which was after she surprised him with a magical noose, nearly choking him to death as she says bow to your queen just a few minutes prior, but I rest my case. By the very end, Kratos and Freya together aim to cleanse the realms from all the bullshit Ragnarok and whatnot has dumped upon them. I only wish they could have fucked, but we all know how that would have ended for Freya. Okay, so the big twist. Tyr is Odin. So the first thing that makes this one of the greatest twists in the history of fucking gaming is the way that Tyr is written is so perfect and so believable. It's so believable, given that he's been imprisoned so long that he might be a little fucking crazy. Him being a goody two-shoes that wouldn't even pick up a spear if his grandmother was being ripped apart by rabid wolves makes sense because it's what led to him being imprisoned in the first place. Despite his attempts to create peace, they all ended in failure. It's the perfect recipe for Odin to take advantage of. He doesn't need to help at all, can always quietly steer Kratos and the gang from war with Asgard and collect any and all information on Ragnarok they discover, or their plans to outsmart him, as anything he says that might show cracks in his disguise won't seem uncharacteristic. Like, yeah, that's just Tyr being the little loopy, good-for-nothing bore we all know and don't love. Yet deal with him because he was once seen as very wise and noble. Because of this, even if the player does think he's unlikable, they won't be contemplating whether or not he's being deceptive. He's got built-in excuses, which makes all the little hints that Tyr is Odin so much more impactful on a second playthrough. This game is worth a second playthrough on this alone. Watching Tyr's every move to see every time the game was foreshadowing his true identity. There are ones that are clear as day that got all the hits on YouTube, like when he walks right into Atreus after seeing his death in a prophecy, but even afterwards when he saves Kratos and Atreus from the Lake of Souls. Not only does he do it slowly and somewhat nonchalantly, but when he pulls them out, he takes a long, menacing look at Atreus, who he just saw kills him in the prophecy. On a first playthrough, you'd just assume it's because he saw himself taking part in Ragnarok, and he's a little moody and disappointed that Atreus brought him along just to show him he's destined to do the one thing he doesn't want to do. But nope. Then at Sindri's house, when he calls Freya Frigg, it's so cool that a player who doesn't care about listening to every piece of dialogue in between cutscenes could miss this. And in fact, there are a bunch more missable hints right under our nose. When Tyr first arrives, his elaborate food order to Sindri. On a first playthrough, one would assume, oh, it's just because he's been locked up so long he wants his favorite foods. Or when Tyr is making dinner for the gang at Sindri's house, and if you talk to Brock beforehand, he's appalled by the fact that Tyr is making a stew with fucking vegetables! Where's the meat? Then when Odin is showing Atreus around Asgard, he walks into the Great Lodge dining room and immediately says,
Jurgen, those better not be mushrooms I smell.
Followed by him admiring some meat one of his soldiers is eating.
That looks good. Is that praised?
Odin is subtly covering his bases to leave no doubt that he couldn't possibly be Tyr. He has tiny little cracks in his performance, but it's also perfectly hidden yet in plain sight the entire time, which makes the moment where he reveals himself all the more impactful, as he kills Brock. Now, I've been holding off talking about the story of Brock and Sindri because it's my favorite in the whole fucking game. No bullshit. I have probably watched the climactic moments of their story 1,000 times over, because I turn into a complete fucking junkie when I love things. But I shouldn't have to preface that with no bullshit, as the way they expand upon these two characters in this game, Sindri especially, is so beautifully done, and so unexpected given how strong the execution is. In the first game, Brock and Sindri are basically just the comic relief other than Mimir, and do a fantastic job at it. A loud, plain-speaking, potty-mouthed blue dwarf and his brother who's an overly polite germ freak. Both polar opposites, yet equally masters at their craft. The brothers that forged what is perhaps the most powerful weapon in all the 9 realms in Mjolnir, and its equally powerful counterpart, the Leviathan Axe. They get their fair share of cutscenes in their reunion, the reforging what was once broke shit that serves as a nice little side story and message to Kratos and Atreus that even though they may disagree, they're family. And part of being family is learning to coexist despite your differences. It's cute, small, and all about Kratos and Atreus watching and learning from others. And again, while it isn't inherently bad to have all the side characters basically being one big fucking PowerPoint presentation for Kratos and Atreus to watch and take notes, it's once again why Ragnarok is so much better. Now, I said just comic relief, and I said cute and small. But in the first game, a foundation for a much larger and more impactful story that bleeds into the second game was quietly being made as they helped Kratos and Atreus throughout their journey. Think about it. Without Brock and Sindri, Kratos and Atreus would have literally gotten fucking nowhere. For every problem, they have a solution. Just to run through a few things from the first game, without Brock, no Key of Yggdrasil. Without both of them, no upgrades to the Leviathan Axe. Without Sindri, no upgrade to Atreus' bow to help them further ascend the mountain. Without Brock, how does Kratos make it out of Helheim? He even offers to help Kratos before he leaves when he learns Atreus is sick, and then shows up anyway despite Kratos declining the offer. Without both of them, how do Kratos and Atreus enter Tyr's temple? How do they know where Mimir's other eye is, which is their direct access to Jotunheim? And they help them purely out of the kindness of their hearts. Sure for Faye, because maybe they wanted to kiss her feet, but they do so much for these two. Most of the time, no questions asked. And for the most part, they don't even get the fucking thanks they deserve. At times, they get the exact opposite.
Rob! What? I'm on a fucking break!
Dwarves are awfully resourceful.
And irritating. based on the two we have met.
We're sick of hearing about little people's little problems.
All right. That hurt a little.
And this is something that continues in Ragnarok. Again, constant upgrades to your weapons, the only reason Kratos and the gang are able to travel to certain realms, their own home, the Draupnir spear, a lot more shit, and of course, their undying friendship. Sindri in particular in this game takes a huge risk by assisting Atreus in his endeavors against Kratos' wishes. The person who belittled him in the first game, and Sindri's out here risking his life for the fucking kid, becoming a second father figure in a way to Atreus. And he's grown to love him so much that he confides in him and tells him a secret no one else in the gang knows, that Brok had died, and Sindri reclaimed 3 out of 4 parts of his soul from the Lake of Souls in Alfheim, fighting his way through the legions of undead spirits to save his brother. Now he says this in the middle of gameplay, so it seems like a casual little interesting character bit that, if expanded upon, surely won't be as big as it ended up being. But this little bit gives us an idea for who Sindri really is, that despite his size or his delicate and lighthearted demeanor, he can be a strong and fearless individual when it comes to loved ones being in danger. He's never told Brok of his death, and it's starting to really eat away at him. Later, when Atreus is contemplating going to Asgard after Sindri and the rest of the gang try to dissuade him from it, he snaps and goes into bear form and storms out of the house, smacking Sindri to the side and destroying his front door in the process. What I love about this moment is that the focus is all on Atreus. There isn't a moment where you see the rest of the gang tending to Sindri. In fact, nobody even shouts when Atreus smacks him to the side. They could all be in shock, sure, but it's just another instance of this man who's given so much to these people being treated like absolute shit. And again, slowly and subtly building it all to something big. After being bear smacked in the fucking face, still wearing the damage with the bandage on his head, Sindri is still immediately willing to give up one of his greatest treasures in the Draupnir ring just to help ensure Atreus' safety and give Kratos an edge against Heimdall. But there's a problem. When Kratos and Freya are about to depart to the dwarf realm to forge the ring into a spear, Sindri is hesitant to let Brok go and speak to the lady, who is for some reason a cool-looking mermaid and will forge it, knowing that he can't speak to her because part of his soul is missing and fearing Brok might find out. Brok insists that he go, cause he never gets to speak to the lady, and he travels with the gang to the dwarf realm where he leads them to the forge. Along the way, he gives Mimir a riddle in the hopes to outsmart him and stump the stump, which he does for the time being. The riddle is, what gets bigger the more you take away? More on that later. When they meet the lady, she forges the spear in insanely epic fashion, even takes Kratos' blood, forms it into the Greek god Omega symbol, and says fuck that shit and switches it to the Sparta symbol. I know that it's the symbol of Sparta because I just looked it up, and a nervous Brok tries to talk to her afterwards to get her to bless the spear. I don't know why he's so nervous. She's a major step down in attractiveness from Faye, who Brok has had many interactions with. But anyway, she completely ignores him. Mimir immediately notices that because the lady is a mermaid, she only speaks to the direction part of one's soul, the one that Brok is missing. Brok puts the pieces together himself, finding out that he died, and is immediately pissed at Sindri, but Kratos stops him and says that the weapon needs a blessing. This is perhaps the kindest act Kratos has ever done, and to Brok nonetheless, which makes it all the more beautiful. When Brok declines and says that it wouldn't be a true blessing because of his broken soul, Kratos repeats what Brok had just told him on the way up to the forge, that it isn't the form of a thing that matters, it's the nature of it. Just fucking beautiful writing.
May this weapon strike true. May it be wielded with wisdom. May it be put down when its job is done.
This is followed by a sad foreshadowing of Mimir making a joke, saying we all die someday, some of us more than once, like himself. I'm going to talk about the soundtrack later, but I just can't help but include it when talking about Brok and Sindri. If you notice, when Mimir makes that joke, the intro to Brok's death music starts.
Listen, I appreciate what you said back there. It's good to have friends when you find out your brother's a rack-scabbing liar.
No doubt he only wished to protect you.
Weren't his call to make. The guy dies, he's got the right to know about it.
Take heart, Brok. We all die sometime. Many of us more than once.
No, never mind all that.
Ugh, my heart. But the unfortunate thing is Brok's end spells the definitive end for him. as because of his fractured soul, he's denied an afterlife, which makes the weight of the situation so much more heartbreaking for Sindri, and for us. Are you crying yet? After Brock's death, we find Sindri at the old workshop at Tyr's temple, where they reforged their brotherhood, and he's forging weapons with Brock's hammer, covered in his brother's blood, dirty and eyes bloodshot. What a huge and unexpected character shift. Sindri blames them for Brock's death and defiantly states how he's given them literally everything, and all Kratos and Atreus ever did was take more and more away from him, and now he's left with literally nothing, not even his own family. Such strong acting here. You can feel the pain and anger in his voice. His closing line here is my favorite line in the entire game.
We. There is no we. There's only you. No matter what the cost. So what you can do is get the fuck out of my sight.
My God, there is so much emotion in that one sentence. There's a subtle hesitation where part of him still wants to forgive them like he always has, while at the same time expressing just how much the part of him that doesn't has taken over. And this carries over into Ragnarok, where yes, Sindri agrees to help, but not to aid anyone, but as a fucking vengeful dwarven warrior. He's there to fight. And he's literally the only dwarf who had the balls to step up to Odin. And I love this touch because the focus remains on him, destroying all the machines his brothers and sisters crafted for this very battle, and even breaks through the giant protective wall surrounding Asgard. Even after Atreus saves him, he reassures him, "This doesn't change anything, you piece of shit." Then of course, later on, Sindri of all people is the one to permanently kill Odin, because everyone else would rather be fucking Mother Teresa's. "Oh, vengeance doesn't have any power over me," smashing Odin's soul marble to dust with Brock's hammer, ensuring that Brock isn't the only one that will be denied an afterlife, and letting out another chilling one-liner.
That's what comes next.
Just fucking perfect. On a deeper level, this scene is so perfect in that a huge core theme in both games is putting aside vengeance and how it doesn't truly cure the pain of loss or anger burning within you, no matter how big or small. Kratos, Freya, and Atreus have ingrained this idea in their heads, but Sindri serves as a great example that no matter how much you try to broker peace, there will always be someone acting purely on vengeance or power. Then of course we get the secret ending in Brock's funeral, rightfully accompanied by my favorite score in the entire game, where Kratos and company say goodbye to the legendary dwarven blacksmith. And Atreus, staying true to treating the Holdra brothers like shit, doesn't attend. I know he takes off at the end of the game, but it's just a funny thing to think about. Like, damn, Kratos made some serious strides, not only letting his son venture off on his own, but even without a fucking magical cell phone? We got fucking single-handed rolling pins that can summon spectral wolves to change the time of day, but a fucking cell phone is out of the cards? Anyway, I love how in the funeral scene Sindri arrives after everyone, still so clouded by hatred and pain. And like I mentioned before, little things like panning the camera towards Sindri, shifting the perspective so the moment carries more weight. Like this is his fucking moment. This is Brock and Sindri's fucking moment. After Brock's farewell, Kratos tries to offer his condolences, to which Sindri immediately turns around in anger, ready to look into Kratos' eyes and see that he's only trying to be nice. But after a long look, he realizes Kratos is being genuine, that he loved Brock. With his kind act at the forge and saying fuck this war business and leaving after Brock's death, Kratos proves he's the only one other than Sindri that truly gives a shit. Sindri can sense it, and that look of hate and disgust for the first time since Tyr's temple fades a little into just sadness. Sindri sadly walks away and disappears, never to be seen again. As he leaves, Mimir finally solves Brock's riddle. A hole gets bigger the more you take away. I've said this 1,000 times already, I'll say it again. Absolutely fucking perfect writing. It's so simple, something Brock most assuredly didn't put much thought into, but at the same time holds so much power in that it describes the hole in Sindri's heart that kept growing and growing as more and more shit was taken away from him.
I have met many on my travels. You are one of the few I would call friend.
So in an attempt to no longer take away more of your time on the story portion, I'll wrap it up. Yes, there are story beats that I didn't go fully in depth with, like Thor's character arc of being an alcoholic fat shitty parent, and how Thrud kinda bored the crap out of me. How about Heimdall? What a piece of shit. That has every reason to be one, given he can see the deception in people no matter how big or small. I'm sure if any of us could legitimately read minds, we'd probably hate everyone too. Kratos killing him, slipping back into his old ways. How Surtur is made into a world-destroying monster and serves next to no purpose other than giving Freyr a chance to sacrifice himself and destroying Asgard. Because there's no way any remaining Asgardian survivors of the war can be redeemed, right? Just kill them all. I could go more in depth on Atreus, just offering us an absolutely fantastic performance, how he's matured so much since the first game, and how every single relationship he develops across this game is interesting and engaging, whether he's learning from it or teaching others or both. Faye's final flashback, where you see her marking the trees from the first game and giving Kratos her wish for her ashes to be spread in Jotunheim. How Baldur was actually looking for her in the first game, and Kratos chopping down that tree at the beginning of the game is what broke the protection stave. The fact that she destroyed Atreus' original prophecy, paving the way for Kratos and Atreus to forge their own destiny. Her telling Kratos to open his heart like he has to her, and he will always find a reason to keep living. Him passing on this lesson to Atreus, saying he was wrong to tell him to close his heart to pain and suffering. Their final goodbye, where Kratos truly lets go and lets his son live his own life. Loki will go. Atreus remains. Beautiful fucking line. I cried. This game is just so loaded with great moments, great writing, great character development, great acting, that it's impossible to praise every aspect of it without going on for hours. And to bring this back to the title of this video, God of War 1 has all these things, and is loaded with spectacles like interacting with the world serpent, eventually entering its stomach, venturing to get the chisel, knocking the huge hammer down, the god killing, the dragon fight, reintroducing the chaos blade, seeing Zeus and Athena. But it's just that Ragnarok manages to excel in almost every aspect. And with that, let's move on to how it excels in the gameplay department. With the release of God of War in 2018, the question was raised, can this series still work if it adds a shitload of RPG elements? Will the integrity of the series be lost to oblivion if it slows the pace a little, adds crafting, stat management, builds to customize your combat experience, status effects, armor? And the answer is yes, it can work, and work well. But before I dive headfirst into the combat, I'd be a fool not to mention that when looking back at God of War 1, one of the major gripes I and many others had with it was in the gameplay department. How can you talk about God of War in all its glory without talking about the huge, ugly, annoying, and repetitive elephant in the room? That for me, when I was a more pretentious and stuck-up gamer back in 2018 and just willing to talk shit about anything and everything, stripped a big chunk of that glory away.
Focus up, boy.
Here's the thing. Having repetitive boss fights in a video game isn't inherently bad, but when those boss fights are already boring as fuck on a third encounter, we have a problem. And you could have included every single one of these troll encounters, okay, maybe not every one, in the game in side content. But when you're playing the main story and you're invested in it, going through a series of enticing cutscenes with character or lore development, having a jolly old time, and then you're smacked in the face with the same ugly, annoying boss fight, the investment unfortunately starts to blur a little. I'm playing a video game here. It should be all fun all the time, no chores or responsibilities. I don't want it to be like I'm making a delicious meal, where after cooking and enjoying the lovely aromas sizzling out of the pan into the air and then stuffing my face like I'm a video game character who never eats, pisses, or shits throughout the full duration of the playthrough, to then sigh and be like, oh fuck. Now I gotta do the dishes. And just to better enforce my point and have this ruined story and gameplay intrigue, when Kratos was told he had to travel to Helheim to slay a beast in order to help cure Atreus, I was thinking, oh boy, I wonder what type of beast this is gonna be. What kind of monsters dwell in Helheim? What's the big reveal? What do we get to fight? Holy shit, is it that gigantic fucking bird? No! It's another fucking troll! What a monumental buzzkill. And sadly, this bleeds over into the common enemies as well. Once again, it is totally fine to have repetitive enemies in a game, but the problem is this game is way too big to be fighting the same shit a million times. And it takes it a step further into anguish and despair by making some of these encounters super long, drawn out, and unnecessary. To those of you who may have forgotten, let's take a trip, ironically, back to hell, sailing aboard the vessel of never-ending boredom, where you get to fight literally 1,000 Hellwalkers with only one weapon because the Blades of Chaos are the only weapon you can use, mashing the attack buttons. Doing the same combo over and over and over, that at this stage in the game is a little limited given you just got the fucking blades. But hey, don't forget the 2 fires you have to keep burning in order to keep the ship afloat. How do you keep them burning, you might ask? By mashing the attack buttons over and over and over and over. There are many other instances where the game just throws a barrage of enemies at you that you've already fought a million times. Like, try and count how many times you're fighting, let's say, a group of 10 to 20 Draugrs, 5 to 10 Nightmares, and an Ogre or 2. I mean, for Christ's sake, everyone uses the trolls to direct their anger at, but try taking a shot every time you see a Draugr in the first game, and you'll die from alcohol poisoning, rise from the dead, continue with the drinking game, and then die again before you finish the fucking first act. There are so many fucking Draugrs in this game, and they're rightfully brought back in the second game as common enemies, sure, but also as powered-up mini-bosses, rightfully named the Hateful. Because with how many times you fucking fight them in the first game, literally look at all the fucking things on screen that I'm showing right now. How many fucking encounters where a shitload just appear at once. The amount of times you fight them in this fucking game will make you hate them. So the name is justified. How about the many times you have to fight my least favorite enemy in both games, those stupid fucking witches, who no matter how hard you mash that square button, still manage to break out of their stun in 2 seconds. All of the enemies, like the trolls, are accompanied with the same death animations that, while great, all lose their taste a little after the 10th time you've fucking done them. Now, that's not to say every enemy sucks. For the most part, they're all fun to fight. Even the fucking Draugrs, alright, fine. The Wolvers are one of my favorite enemy types across both games, are insanely dangerous and have such a sick R3 execution. But there are more things I can poke fun at, like how from the moment you step foot in Alfheim, you're fighting a million elves, all with the same attacks, death animations, the usual shit. And your reward at the end of your Alfheim journey is fighting literally a million elves. And then a boss fight, where the boss has all the same attacks and death animations as the fucking elves you just fought. Pretty fucking insane. I can mention the trolls again, because why not be a true fan and honor the game by bringing them up the same amount of times you fight them, ironically carrying the game in terms of boss fight encounters on their shoulders. In Ragnarok, there's a moment where the game makes fun of this glaring issue by teasing a fight with one early in the game, but Kratos just axes his head off before we have a chance to say no! There are a few you can fight in the game though, but they are rightfully optional. It's almost as if the first game could have been much more digestible had they switched out the trolls for the nearly same amount of times you fight Valkyries in side content. But sticking to the positive side of things, God of War does have some great boss fights, like the Valkyries, the Dragon, both of Baldur's fights, Magni and Modi, And excluding the Valkyries, the main story bosses I just listed all have levels to them, gimmicks to keep you thinking or switch up the pace. The dragon has the added gimmick of having to throw red crystals during its lightning attacks. Baldur has the added cinematics in between different stages of the fight, the little minigame that has you pounding him to a pulp, which the game abuses the shit out of, but who cares because it's fun. In his second encounter, you have the extremely annoying Freya interferences, but the not annoying inclusion of using the giant you saw lying dead earlier in the game as a nice little set piece for the battle, adding to the scale of it. Having to switch your weapon based on which element Baldur's currently channeling, be it fire or ice. With Magni and Modi, you have the minigame where you're circling around in a cloud of smoke trying to predict what direction they're going to attack you from. Sure, it's not the most exciting minigame of the world, but at least it's different. And in the Dragon and Baldur fights, you of course have the added QuickTime events that add some epicness to the fight. But like I said before, having such a small variety of boss fights for a game that will take you at the very least 20 plus hours to complete is a huge damper on an otherwise great game. Excluding the Dark Elf, Trolls, and Ancient/Soul Eaters because they all suck, that brings the main story boss fight variety down to fucking 3. Which is the same number that in Ragnarok you will have already hit within the first hour and a half of playtime, Atreus' bear form, the Huntress, and Thor. So needless to say, Ragnarok fixes the fuck out of this issue with a wide variety of common enemies and boss fights. In terms of story boss fights, you have the 3 I just mentioned, the alligator dragons, which provided me with my first ever legitimate jump scare in a God of War game, the World Tree Dragon with all its Doctor Strange-like realm hole attacks, seeing Freya and Kratos team up in battle for the first time, and seeing what the rage and battle heart inside of Freya can truly do when she isn't trying to rip your head off. Even though Freya ends up an ally helping you in that World Tree Dragon fight, she even gets a boss fight. Gryla, Angrboda's grandma, an Atreus exclusive boss that legitimately made me feel like I was playing a different game for a moment. And that wasn't just because I was playing as Atreus. When's the last time there was a God of War fight when you weren't at the very least trying to get some type of bloodshed? It felt like this was T for teen God of War, but in a good way. The Light Elf Queen, that was much better than the Dark Elf King in the first game. Faster, cooler attacks, cooler design, and a cooler weapon. The scythe-wielding captain of Odin's army that has some hard-to-telegraph attack patterns and a sick death animation. The Phantom fights that have some of the coolest looking attacks out of all the bosses, along with the unique mechanic of having to destroy the altars, providing its power just to deal damage. Garm in 2 epic encounters where you'll be on your toes going for those pitch-perfect dodges to stop his fast and ferocious dog bites, or feeling the weight and velocity of each of his chain attacks, my favorite being the chain slam, as it's hard to tell exactly where to land, even though the chain is fully visible, which makes it all the more scary as it comes crashing down on you. Getting to snap his giant neck with that chain, him surviving and it turning into you just getting the fuck out of dodge, which really brought back that old God of War feel whenever you're facing a giant enemy and in between the actual fight, there's running and platforming as it destroys the environment around you. The 2 Valkyries, who get what is easily a candidate for best boss ending QuickTime event in the entire game. Heimdall setting the tone with Atreus being annoyed by his invulnerability, and then getting to break through it with the spear as Kratos. Him growing a fucking Bifrost arm and having realm shift attacks. Thor's second encounter that, like Baldur, is an upgraded version of the first. Odin twice, where it does the same thing as Thor and Baldur, only back to back. All these fights have such a wide variety of attacks, all unique to them. Some have phases and cool QuickTime events either sprinkled throughout the fight or at the end, that make them feel more important, more epic, and more fun. Not like the Trolls, who primarily all get the same attack patterns. Most, unless I'm missing something, get no recognizable phases, and all with the same tired old fucking death animation. Now sure, like the Trolls, some of the bosses in Ragnarok you face more than once. And sure, there are common enemy types you once again face 1,000 times, like the Draugrs again, Nightmares, or the Asgardian soldiers. But it's way better paced. There are only a few times where you'll be saying to yourself, ugh, this again? As like the boss fights, there's such a huge variety of enemies, all with unique attacks and executions, some requiring a specific weapon to break through their armor before you get to their actual health bar, some having up to 4 or 5 different death animations, with some executions being exclusive to the weapon you currently have equipped. And because of that, and the fact that a lot of them are cooler than the ones in the first game, you'll never get tired of performing them. One thing that felt like a step away from all the God of Wars of the past in the first game was the lack of blood, gore, and dismemberment. There is some, sure, but when there's a bunch of death animations that don't have you chopping off limbs and every time you are, it's the limbs of a creature made of rock and lava with no blood, or a creature that has different color blood, it loses a little bit of that shock factor. Now this isn't inherently a crime, as you can have impactful combat without having to fucking decapitate people. But when your main weapon is a heavy axe, it does kinda call for it. And this is the first instance in Ragnarok where we come across something that if left unaddressed would have probably been forgiven. But the dismemberment and gore is turned up quite a bit from the first game. Now, not only are we getting more brutal R3 death animations and more enemies who bleed red, but now we can cut off limbs from basic attacks, down to just a light throw of the axe. It makes combat all the more satisfying and leaves bigger opportunities for each and every enemy you encounter, from big fish to small fry, to be more engaging. It's something so subtle yet adds so much. Accompanied with the diversity in the R3 executions, it makes it really hard to ever get bored or repetitive, which helps you stay invested in the story or fight, and to bring back that delicious meal analogy, lets the dishes wash themselves. But speaking of staying invested, before I dive deeper into the combat and a few of these boss fights, I'm not done complaining. Both of these games, for me, have a gigantic, monumental fucking issue that's almost as infuriating as the Trolls, which is the difficulty setting / leveling up system. So in other words, the fucking armor. In both games, you start off with a very clean and sexy default outfit that will force you to get one-shot killed by enemies later on in the game should you not change into the most disgusting clothing known to mankind. And I'd be slightly less pissed off if the easiest difficulty setting of these games wasn't called Give Me the Story. As in, don't give me all the RPG elements and let it be a walk in the park for someone who rarely plays video games.
This'll be easy! We're gods!
Boy!
So that's it then?
Maybe I'm reaching a little, but wouldn't you think that's what a difficulty called Just Give Me the Story is implying? Now, I'm no rookie. I actually plan on beating both of these games on Give Me God of War after I finish this video. But if I want to just coast by and enjoy the story without having to deal with stat management, I can't, unless I look like a fucking clown. Seriously, I don't know how people can even watch cutscenes or full game movies on YouTube with Kratos looking like a complete idiot. I know these are games centered around Norse mythology, but I want Kratos to look like a Viking, not look like he's playing for the fucking Minnesota Vikings. And your average kiss-ass nerd idiot fanboy would argue, well, what do you mean? You can upgrade the default armor set now. Yeah, and I'm forced to change its color after like what, level 3 or 4? Oh, but they fixed this by allowing you to edit the appearance of your current armor set to the one you like and keep all the stats of the ugly shit. Yeah, after you max out its level with items you can't get until the tail end of the fucking game. And my valid bitching and moaning doesn't end there, as the same shit I'm talking about applies to your weapons as well. I do not understand the obsession with gold trim in these games. I know Kratos has rocked gold in previous installments, but here it's just fucking way too much. As you upgrade your axe and blades in both games, you change the appearance of them, from dirty, rustic, battle-hardened steel befitting of this version of Kratos, to fucking gold all of my blades, gold all of my ring, gold all of my axe. Oh, you like? To me, the shit whack. And the most annoying part of it all is if you don't rock all gold everything, you lose out on a shitload of good skills tied to your weapon level. Fuck you. But annoying armor aside, thankfully 2 of the best fights from both games by default on a first playthrough gives you no choice but to don the armor Kratos was meant to wear, and keep you tied to your base abilities and moveset, while at the same time giving you battles you will never forget. I said before how Baldur and Thor's first boss fights mirror each other. I love when sequels, whether in games or movies, do this, where they pace the story or game exactly the way the first was and stick to the same formula without it being insulting or feeling cheap, proving why it was so good in the first place. And speaking of the mirroring, it's not just contained within the fight, there's also mirroring before and after it. Kratos walking out of the house holding Faye at the beginning of the first game versus Kratos walking out of the cave holding a dead deer with the identical camera shot. A boat ride home versus a sleigh ride home, the warm-up boss fight before returning home and starting the real shit. The real journey for Kratos and Atreus in both games starting when their home is no longer safe. It's just something that super fans who are super attentive and notice these things greatly appreciate. And like I showcased in the story portion, how Thor's fight replicates Baldur's to a T in terms of some of the cutscene/QTE attacks either them or Kratos are doing. Both fights creating a shitload of intrigue with the fact that we see Kratos struggling in both instances to put them down as they insult him. Is that all you got? Seeing Baldur's health bar regenerate and his wounds heal, like how the fuck are we supposed to kill this dude? Thor even flat out defeats Kratos, that's canon folks, and there's a hilarious game over hint screen to make you think that you fucked up, but Thor jolts Kratos back to consciousness.
I say when we're done.
In both fights, we get a moment 2/3 of the way where we see the world affected by the battle. In Baldur's, you have the land just outside of Kratos' house splitting literally in half as they lock hands in a test of strength. With Thor, you have the clash of the axe and Mjolnir, creating a giant frozen thunderbolt from the sky to the ground, mirroring the one in Vanaheim from when Faye fought Thor. Really cool shit. And although their actual attacks during the gameplay portion, like Kratos's, are very limited, all of them feel so fucking impactful. Now I'm reading this back thinking most of what I just said isn't actual gameplay related, but I needed an excuse to talk about these fights again. But still, the cutscenes in between actual gameplay segments and QTEs, whether or not you hate them, are what make these fights so goddamn epic and memorable for everyone. And it's because of these things, wait for it as this might be blasphemy to some, makes Baldur's fight more enjoyable to me. It's just so adrenaline inducing watching someone fiercely protecting their family and home, knowing how dangerous Kratos is, him warning Baldur of this and letting out the first,
"Leave my home."
him trying his best not to engage with him, even eating a backhand to the face, while at the same time there's still a small part of him that's willing to give in to that Spartan rage and kick the shit out of this guy. This is a pre-full-on redemption arc Kratos, and this fight showcases just how brutal he still is at this point. Him punching Baldur down and then getting the reveal that Baldur is insanely powerful is so shockingly awesome on a first playthrough. The way he just fucking ragdolls Kratos, dishing out some fucking wrestling moves with the electric chair slam, with a fucking German suplex, swinging an entire tree like it's a fucking wiffle ball bat and sending Baldur flying, the neck snap. Ugh. I'm going a little too in depth with this, but I fucking love the Baldur fight. The only thing where it loses points is the amount of times Baldur doesn't shut the fuck up with the "I can't feel any of this" bullshit. For Christ's sake, we get it. On the Thor side of things, he's got a shitload of hilarious lines throughout the fight.
I could give a hot shit about your fatherly advice. I want to see the God of War. Who started this? This is the God that murdered a pantheon because they hurt his feelings.
But speaking of not feeling anything, I love how Thor takes an axe to the stomach at the start of the fight, and then throughout the entirety of the game just leaves the gash open and bleeding. Just a big ass open wound on his fat belly. Doesn't try and heal it in any way. Like, what the fuck? There's a fine line between trying to wear the scars of war like a badass and just a fucking health hazard. Put a big fat band-aid on that shit. I'm surprised all the food and booze aren't oozing out of his gut for the rest of the game. But anyways, I'm gonna save myself from writing a build up to the next bombshell I'm about to drop because this script is long enough. But I think there's an argument to be made that Baldur's final fight is better than Odin's. Oh boy. But don't get into a fit of Spartan rage about it, as I'm still not sure who's the clear-cut winner. Odin has more varied attacks, cooler and more advanced abilities. He's harder. He's the All-Father, the god of all gods. Freya serves as an ally instead of just fucking with the fight every 15 seconds. But the thing is, for me, the excitement of the fight is all stemming from how well the story in Ragnarok was put together up until that point. All the character development. We go from a cutscene that has Odin fucking killing Thor and then smacking through it into left field for a home run, right into the fight. It's the first time that we're getting a taste of Odin's true power in combat. But I'll tell you what we don't get. We don't get Surtur playing a role in the fight to justify his existence in any way, like how the Giant plays a big role in the Baldur fight. All the QuickTime events, climbing the chisel, fighting on his shoulder. We don't get Loki calling on Jormungandr to bite the giant's head in epic fashion. We don't have the fight taking place in multiple different settings. Kratos busts out some much cooler moves in the cutscenes, and we get the classic mash R1 and R2 to pound the shit out of Baldur's Head minigame. Atreus gets an awesome showing as well. That fucking moment where Kratos jumps off the giant, holding Baldur as Atreus leaps off and rains down some arrows as they're falling out of the sky, is still one of the coolest fucking action sequences I have ever seen in a game. Kratos trusting him in that moment, and that carrying on with the classic square combos at the end of the fight that have so much more impact than the ones at the end of the Odin fight. Seeing all the distance between Kratos and Atreus established throughout the game completely dissipate as they work together as a unit. Just fucking spectacular. Again, not taking anything away from the Odin fight, but it's just kinda better. You be the judge. Moving on. When it comes to skills, holy fuck does Ragnarok up the ante, as there's a shitload of skill trees to play around with. That again for the axe and blades are loaded with abilities from the first game, but let's stay positive. It's really fun in a first playthrough, like when you get to first play as Atreus and seeing the bulk of his skill tree open up, or tagging along with Freya for the first time and seeing that she gets her own skill tree as well. Even Brock, Sindri, and Angrboda get their own press square attacks, which I always forget to press. Like I said with the story, switching up the duo over and over allows other characters to be more fleshed out and interesting. But not only that, it offers fresh new gameplay elements over and over that, while small, just help things become less repetitive. And it's also perfectly paced. You'll play as Kratos for a good chunk of time, get new skills, then Atreus, completely new moveset and skill tree, then back to Kratos, more XP equals more new skills or a new companion, back to Atreus, more XP equals more new skills or a companion than the ability to use Wolf Rage, then back to fucking Kratos, more XP equals more new skills and a new rage ability, back to Atreus, new skills, back to Kratos, whole new weapon, new skill tree, new rage ability, back to Atreus, bear, fuck! Atreus is such a breath of fresh air, isn't he? Never in my wildest dreams did I think Ragnarok would have me play as Atreus and be like, damn, I could be just fine ditching Kratos' moveset entirely. Let's kill this motherfucker and get a new main protagonist. Shame you can't use him after the game ends. But Atreus' sections provide a fantastic change of pace, both in story and gameplay. His ventures with Sindri, with Angrboda in Ironwood, running away from the gang to Asgard, climbing the huge wall, the missions he goes on with Thor and Thrud, all do such a great job at giving you fresh and fun things to do. Now, although some would consider the Ironwood section as the massive troll-sized elephant in the room for Ragnarok, I disagree. Due to the inherently bleak and depressing themes we're presented with for a majority of the game, it serves as a necessary sign of hope and happiness. While there is some lightheartedness and joking sprinkled throughout the game from every character, we even get the gang sitting down and having dinner, this is the first instance when it isn't surrounded by any form of dread. And your enjoyment of this section will teeter on how much you want to invest yourself in this change of theming. And I didn't find that to be a difficult task by any means, as the interactions between Angrboda and Atreus don't feel like I'm being force-fed a shitty teenage love story. Their dialogue is cute, quirky, engaging, and does a lot to advance the main plot. It's not like it feels like this distinctly different story or game in an attempt to try and force us away from the idea of God of War that we're familiar with, but rather a natural progression for this game and Atreus' character. Now, admittedly, I do think that the complaint of the fruit fetching segment dragging on just a wee bit too long is valid on a second playthrough, but I didn't get the idea that it was a crime the first time I played. For me, the two most annoying parts of this section is the fact that Angrboda just can't stop herself from fucking bursting into song and screaming "Yeah!" every 2 minutes, and the fact that every time I play the cave section, I get lost within 2 minutes. But that doesn't take away at all from what I just said, and just because the 2-ish hours you spend in Ironwood isn't absolutely bombarded with combat, it doesn't mean it's non-existent. I seriously don't know what game people are playing in this section when they say, where's the combat? Where's the fun gameplay? As there's multiple combat scenarios, the introduction to Atreus' Wolf Rage ability, a fun boss fight in a cool setting, and the race with Angrboda at the end, which is the cherry on top that perfectly wraps up this section. It's one of the highlights of the entire game for me. Again, going back to this whole section symbolizing freedom and happiness, this is Atreus roaming free and finally just being a kid, away from the clutches of his father. There's just something so satisfying about watching an animal being carefree, running and having fun. And this is amplified by the fact that Jotunheim is so fucking beautiful and bright, and of course having Atreus' theme in the background just perfectly sets the tone. As far as Atreus' combat goes, my god is it satisfying. Even though it's a much lighter and fast-paced version of the combat compared to Kratos, which is a good thing, you can still feel the weight and power behind every swing of the bow. Some of his combos are just fucking insane, doing multiple flips in the air before smacking the bow down on enemies. His back dodge attack is one of my favorites. The animations are just so smooth and crisp. His triangle attack to hone in on enemies is such a welcome addition when you want to stick to melee attacks, not having to sprint over to the enemy like you do with Kratos unless you're using the blades. His parries with the shield ball look and feel awesome, especially paired with one of his realm shift abilities, where time slows down and gives you extra time to get an epic bow shot in. Finally being able to feel the power behind the magic bow shots instead of just mashing square as Kratos. I love that you can dodge mid-aim to avoid taking damage as you line up your shots, even shoot as you're dodging. When Atreus has Ingrid as a companion, you can dish out what in my opinion are the coolest square attacks in the game. Atreus' runic attacks are super satisfying, again getting to execute the soul animal attacks firsthand instead of having to hold square as Kratos mid-gameplay. My favorite one being the Green Falcon runic attack, in a way tying in Odin's influence on Atreus into the combat, which is a great touch. I know they're not fucking ravens, but they're green and it's fucking Loki or whatever and it's birds and it's fucking Odin, whatever. But I love when aspects of the story subtly bleed into the combat. Something I didn't notice in the first game until I recently replayed it was how when Atreus finds out he's a god and is going through his arrogant douchebag phase, you'll notice that he'll perform his summon attacks without you initiating them yourself. Sure, you see him beating up other enemies right in front of your face, but this one is more hidden and actually part of the combat instead of being a forced event that you have to watch. How about his armor sets and different bows in Ragnarok, donning some green and gold befitting of the name Loki on his armor or bow with upgrades. Unlike Kratos, all of his armor sets look cool and or tied to the story. And as someone who's very keen on matching up character outfits with the tone and theme of the story or just trying to look the coolest, just changing between outfits with him was exciting as fuck for me. I know it's stupid, but fuck you. But I just love Atreus, no homo. I can't stress enough just how crucial his sections are to this game being a masterpiece. He's the heart and soul of the game, and his separation from Kratos not only allows him to grow, but the relationship between the two to grow even stronger. One last thing before we move on, I just had to mention how hilarious it is when Atreus encounters his first basic chest on his own and tries to smash it like Kratos and fails, showcasing just how powerful Kratos is and reinforcing that we're on the sun's path now. So on to Kratos. Ragnarok brings back a lot of the original skills and runic attacks for him, like I said, which is totally fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Especially considering the fact that you get a whole new character to play as in Atreus, with his own moveset, skill trees, and runic attacks. But here's where it gets interesting, as I found myself missing quite a few of the skills and runics I had at my disposal in the first game, that were either left absent or used in different ways. Like the triple slash runic attacks for the axe, both heavy and light versions. It was super satisfying to just melt through a bunch of enemies if they were upgraded enough. In terms of standard skills, this is just a personal opinion, but I actually prefer the hold R1 attacks for both the axe and the blades from the first game, that are completely abandoned in Ragnarok. Not having a quick to use non-runic based cyclone attack for the blades to deal damage to enemies in every direction was disappointing for me, as to go back to the original God of War trilogy was an attack I used constantly. Replacing that with the flurry that was once the delayed R1 attack once you start a combo in the first game, and removing a delayed R1 for the blades entirely just felt weird. Now that's not to say that the new blade attacks aren't welcome, like winding up a blade spin by mashing triangle instead of aiming and bringing down a fire-fueled slam. I just prefer the original moveset. As far as the axe, I miss being up close and dishing out that hold R1 fast spinning attack, which was one of the fastest ways to deal a bunch of hits in the first game. It just looked cool. And while the new ice wave attack that was a runic attack in the first game, now the new hold R1, looks cool as well and is fun to execute, it's yet another axe move that takes long to use and leaves you vulnerable, which I'll dive further into in a second. I loved in the first game when Atreus would essentially give you a little assist when using certain attacks. It was such a cute little touch to make your companion actually feel like they're working with you, without you controlling them, instead of them just being off in the distance doing their own shit when you're not. The Executioner's Cleave, or to those who don't know its name, the Hold R2 attack from the first game, is sorely missed in Ragnarok. I complained about the lack of R3 executions in the first game, but the Executioner's Cleave was something that helped tremendously in giving us some variety. And it was so satisfying to execute an enemy without having to build up their stun bar and avoid having them just wither away to dust, which is anticlimactic as fuck. One last thing I really miss is the extra shield combos. Why get rid of all these? I get it, to lower the massive amount of skills you can unlock, but just give them to me at the start then. Especially because this game is unfortunately on the long list of sequels that make you work to unlock skills you already previously worked to unlock in the first game. It was so satisfying to throw your axe away and immediately have access to a whole new moveset that's equally fun without having to swap to another weapon. I used to spam that shield shockwave attack constantly. But I guess all the different shield types and the drop near spear makes up for their absence. Though I've only used the parry shield as of this writing, because that's just my preferred way to play. It makes parrying way more satisfying, gives you an extra stagger attack for bosses that you can just have stored once you get a perfect parry. I wish that the game gave you more resources to upgrade all the shields to max in a single playthrough. I do want to try the rest when I can. And the drop near spear is a nice little nod to the old God of War feel, where by the end you have multiple weapons at your disposal. Ragnarok also makes up for having to unlock previously owned skills by adding the triangle charges for all of Kratos' weapons. It helps in not having the beginning of the game feel sluggish in terms of the attacks you can use, a problem that the first game sort of had. But yeah, they are an absolute joy to use. I definitely don't forget to press triangle mid-combat, square can still go fuck itself. For the axe specifically, it avoids having to throw it at a small enemy 1,000 times trying to get a headshot so you can get the cooler, heavier throws. This is something I greatly appreciate. Even though regardless, it's always fun to throw and recall the axe 1,000 times. For the spear, a nice little change of pace, being able to stack bombs onto enemies to deal extra damage by tapping or holding the triangle button, which is what I mainly used it for. But like every weapon, by the time you fully upgrade them, you have so many different ways to approach the combat. I also love the addition of pressing L1 and triangle to power up a weapon of your choosing after dealing a number of attacks without taking damage. This is something that was present in the first game, but without the option of locking in your power up for a short duration of time regardless if you get hit. It also provides as a great opening to stagger enemies and deal damage and let out some amazing runic attacks, which are awesome across both games. I love the attack for the axe that allows you to lock on to one or more enemies and keep them occupied as you deal with the other ones. It's something that was in the first game with the hold R1 like throw thing for the axe, but it's much better to have like the slow down in time so that you don't get hit as you try to lock onto each of the enemies. I also love the new Tame the Beast attack, which while annoying as it can push the enemy away letting it break out of the attack, it's still super fun to execute when you pick the right spot to use it. The addition of shield strikes is so welcome, interrupting an enemy as they charge up their own respective versions of a runic attack. That split second where time slows down and you're wondering whether or not you got close enough to get the strike makes things so much more cinematic. The addition of new rage abilities for Kratos, something that didn't necessarily need to be included but I'll happily take. Maybe you're sick of the same old rage combos from the first game. Maybe you just care about the healing aspect of the ability, so use Valor. Maybe you don't care about the healing or the combos and would rather dish out a single heavy damage dealing attack instead of a barrage of lighter ones. Use Wrath. There's even interactable shit in the environment this time around that you can use to throw at enemies or smack the axe down on a tree stump causing an explosion. All the talismans/sword hilts return from the previous game. You can even use Mimir as a weapon. Just so many fucking options to vary the combat, it's gonna make my fucking head explode. And everything just flows so effortlessly. You can change weapons on the fly with no delay, which is a great recipe for relentlessly dishing out 6 runic attacks and then even a rage attack on top of them in quick succession to deal massive damage. And to finally talk positive about the armor, most sets come with different perks and abilities that you can tailor to your playstyle. I really like how in Ragnarok they ditched the whole enchantment socket thing, which would have you constantly equipping and removing your best enchantments to put them on better armor. It was never a big problem, but getting rid of them makes things less convoluted. Instead, all weapons and armor are tied to a simple upgrade system requiring hack silver and crafting materials sprinkled throughout the game. And in the enchantment socket's place, we have the Amulet of Yggdrasil, where you can focus on either completing a set of 3 to get an ability, or maybe just stacking a bunch of slots with stat boosts that you feel need the most attention. And if you're not like me and take the time to create an effective build, you can end up melting enemy health by stacking abilities on top of each other that all work cohesively. It could have some of your runic attacks doing double or even triple the damage, which is a good argument to what I'm about to complain about, and that's not having invincibility frames on any of the runic attacks. This is something that just irks me, because with endgame boss fights, the difference between life and death can be choosing the wrong runic attack and being stuck in a long animation that leaves you vulnerable. For me personally, unless I'm taking a huge chunk of enemy health, I don't want to be vulnerable during those attacks, and if I am, for Christ's sake, just let me cancel them. But again, yet another valid argument to make me look like a whiny idiot. This game introduces skill attachments that you can unlock by performing attacks X amount of times, which can offer things like boosted damage, boosted weapon charge, boosted status effect damage, boosted stun, or boosted defense when using attacks with longer animations. Now, the first game had these, but they unnecessarily required massive stat requirements just to be used. Tying them to how often you use the ability associated with them is much more appropriate. And this is such a great incentive for people to break in new skills or combo modifiers that they otherwise might forget. It's a way to test out new playstyles to the point where you can never complain about the combat becoming redundant. Speaking of incentives to take a break from combat and smoothly transition to exploration, there's a huge incentive to explore, as just like the first game, your health and rage meter along with new runic attacks or weapon attachments are all tied to opening chests scattered throughout the world. And there's good and bad to this, as side content and exploration in Ragnarok is a ton of fun, but if you don't do any side content and just stick to main story missions, you can have no health or rage upgrades and next to no runic attacks all the way up until the final boss, whereas in God of War 1, at least with runic attacks, there's quite a few you can pick up just on main story progression alone. I remember probably being like 10 plus hours into my first playthrough of Ragnarok, thinking where the fuck is my heavy runic attack for the axe or the blades? It's a little ridiculous, like just give me my least favorite that I never wanted to use in the first place and I'll settle. There's still a shitload of artifacts and lore to pick up, to not read or pay attention to if you're like me, but the characters usually offer little insights on what you pick up, so nothing feels inherently meaningless. And with this abundance of collectibles and weapons to add to your arsenal, creating the need to explore, we have one of the many little flaws from the first game that could have been left untouched and nobody would give a shit. But I give a shit. Traversal is so much faster and smooth in Ragnarok compared to the first game. Even the smallest inconvenience, well, to some this is a large one, like kicking a chain to create a shortcut and being immediately forced into climbing down it, no longer exists. Ledges that you should easily be able to just fall down from instead of having to climb down can now be jumped off of. What used to sometimes feel like a long, boring, and slow trip to reach optional items and other side content is now for the most part mitigated by using the Chaos Blades to zip past boring hold analog stick in one direction platforming bullshit. But with that, it's worth noting some very convenient optional features that Ragnarok adds that were absent in the first game that deserve a huge thank you. And I'm talking about auto pickup and traversal assist. These features are proof to all you gamers out there that might complain about things being too tedious or button mapping that's uncomfortable for you. Always check the menu for features that you can use to tailor your gameplay experience to your liking. With the addition of auto pickup, no longer when after slaying a boss that drops a shitload of collectibles, upgrades, and money, will you have to mash the circle button 1,000 times just to carry on with your day. You also auto pick up health and rage crystals, assuming they're not full, which is great for when you're panicking and about to die to a hard boss, and don't have to worry about pressing circle or possibly missing some health, realizing it, rushing to pick it up, and then getting yourself killed. The health crystals also stun enemies, which is awesome and can have you accidentally staggering bosses with auto pickup on, basically giving you a free opening to attack. With traversal assist, you can eliminate the need to press circle when vaulting over objects, climbing over ledges, and initiating climbing sequences. It makes things so much easier. Enable both of these things and you'll be more hooked than one of the Chaos Blades on one of those fucking red ceiling light bulb things, whatever the fuck they are, when it comes to traversal and exploration. And like the bow abilities in the first game, your new weapon in the Drop Near Spear allows you to unlock more areas to be explored that you couldn't reach prior, and offer another means of traversal. All the swinging around like you're a 300-pound Tarzan brings a little of that old school God of War flair. And I forgot to mention that with a swing, or if you're hanging off the edge of a cliff in Ragnarok, you can now execute death from above attacks that bring some verticality to the combat. But back to things being faster and less tedious. Realm travel is much faster. With every Mystic Gateway on the map, you can travel to literally any Mystic Gateway on the map. God of War 1 definitely wins presentation points for having the cool-ass realm travel room, but there are times where prettiness and presentation need to take a back seat to speed and convenience. Using the boat, or in the second game, the boat or the sleigh, helps speed the process of travel a little, but when it comes to revisiting areas you haven't fully cleaned out if you're going for 100%, being able to travel to any realm within seconds really helps. Though admittedly, it could still be a gigantic pain in the ass, as there are areas if you didn't fully explore during the main story, afterwards become 5 to 10 minute trips just to find a single item or optional boss fight. Like going back to the Elf Temple in Alfheim and having to travel through the entirety of it with no way to fast travel out. And that becomes even more painful when on the path to that collectible, it's very easy to become lost and confused. I'm talking to you, Vanaheim, but more on that later. It's worth noting that even puzzle solving has been improved immensely to be more fun and intricate. Things like the ricochet crystals in Alfheim, freezing water puzzles in the Dwarf Realm, using the Chaos Blades to move platforms, huge monuments, and gigantic rocks, the many hex arrow puzzles where you can create big magenta ball chains to light things on fire or freeze things in place, the larger variety of Nornir chest puzzle types. It's very telling of how fucking great this game is when I'm listing off puzzle sections in a game where they have no business being this fun. In God of War 1, all the shit is at a more rudimentary level, where you're just lining up where to throw your axe and blades and bow all over the place. And any fun and unique puzzles from the first game that do exist clearly weren't fun or challenging enough because I don't fucking remember them.
Father, no!
Brother, get up, brother!
Overall, for the first half of Ragnarok, the side content is very well paced. With each new realm you visit after or during your main story mission for that realm, there will be a side mission having to do with something you just discussed in the middle of the main mission. Or if it's after, the side mission usually contains dialogue with characters about the events that just took place. It's a great way to help maintain the pace of the main plot, so what you're doing doesn't feel completely unrelated or mess with the current tone. This is something that's present in the first game as well. It's only when Vanaheim shows up and is like, "Step aside, bitches, the side content about to open up like a motherfucker." Not only in Vanaheim, but new areas from previously visited realms open, which at that point does mess with the pace of the story a little, should you be unable to resist checking everything out. But it's far from a bad thing when almost all the side content has interesting stories to tell all on their own. Quite frankly, you can make an argument that a lot of the side content in God of War 1 is more interesting and fun than the main missions at times, and opens up some of the more beautiful or unique areas in Midgard. It's not all just a case of mindlessly checking off a boatload of collectible and mini boss fight boxes on the map. But speaking of that, when you revisit Vanaheim, the side content once again opens up like a motherfucker. Vanaheim has so much side content that all of it alone could be released as an indie game and win Indie Game of the Year. The sheer size and amount of shit to do on the main map seem like enough, but when the crater area opens up, holy fucking shit is there a lot to do. And I'm so open to doing that Vanaheim side content, when it no longer has me constantly running into fucking death plants exploding acid in my face or shooting at me. The crater is where we reach maximum fun, as the Dragon Hunt boss fights stick it to those stupid trolls, proving repetitiveness can totally be awesome when you don't suck as a boss, and your presentation is cool and exciting. Seeing a dragon getting ready to nosedive attack you from the sky and then shooting it out of it is insanely satisfying. There's even an attack certain dragons have where they grab you and fly all over the place, which you don't get to see unless it gets you, so let it get you. And the game does a great job at showcasing them before the fight, instead of having them all just waiting patiently in one hidden spot. Along with these dragon fights are a bunch more Traveler's mini-boss fights, another Phantom battle, tons of collectibles, more World Tree rifts that, like the first game, are scattered across the realms and give you a chance to fight some higher level common enemies for a prize. Buried treasure, Hell Realm tears from when Garm was freed, remnants of Asgard in the post-game, fighting powered up Asgardian soldiers who for some reason survived the destruction of Asgard, rendering Surtur completely useless. And even after you think you're done plowing through every hole in the crater, you release liquid into it, which adds even more areas to explore. It's kind of fucking ridiculous. And very fun, aside from the Celestial Altar mechanic that can sometimes make things insanely fucking confusing. But even with the combined efforts of this mechanic and the bloodthirsty plant life, their attempts to ruin this realm's level of fun end in failure. In both games, we get our beloved endgame side content in Niflheim and Muspelheim, as well as our Berserker/Valkyrie boss fights. And this is something that gets weird when comparing the two, because while it seems easy to immediately hail Ragnarok as having superior endgame content, the first game has tiny instances where it's better. The Muspelheim trials in Ragnarok are a clear-cut winner. Not only is there a lot more unique and more difficult challenges, but holy fucking shit does the big issue with the first game and enemy variety shine in Muspelheim. I don't care what gimmick you attach to these fights, when it's against the exact same type and number of enemies every single fucking time, the real challenge is how long you can stomach this shit without falling asleep. During the huge enemy gauntlet in Ragnarok, you'll find yourself saying, holy shit, there's more? How am I gonna survive this shit? Whereas in the first game, you'll be thinking, ugh, can this shit fucking end already? As you wait patiently for a wave of Draugrs to slowly spawn in, after you just killed a wave of Draugrs that slowly spawned in. Seriously, when I revisited these trials for this video and got to the 100 enemy challenge, I was shocked. It is literally 70 Draugrs, 15 Hellwalkers, 5 Ogres, and 5 Travelers. I know there isn't a shitload of enemy types in the first game, but for your 100 enemy gauntlet, you couldn't include more than 4 fucking different types of enemies? The only thing the trials in the first game earn points for is not having to repeat them over and over to unlock a bigger challenge like you have to do in Ragnarok. And also how the entire time you're ascending the volcano till you're met with a Valkyrie at the top, versus all the challenges in Ragnarok being in a small area. But hey, at least all the major challenges in Ragnarok take place in a big wide open battlefield. There's tons of cool shit like a mini boss rush, that challenge where you have to stay away from the lava while fighting waves of enemies, or Ragnarok's version of the huge enemy gauntlet where you have to survive for like 10 minutes or some shit against an absolutely massive barrage of enemies. At times there are enemies covering literally every inch of the field, while you have Freya and Mimir screaming, "Enemy behind you, Kratos!" What the fuck do you mean, enemy behind me? They're fucking everywhere! So now with Niflheim, on one end in Ragnarok, it's totally cool that the Odin Ravens actually mean something. But the reward being a fight with an overpowered version of my least favorite enemy in the game, albeit it's along with a dragon, isn't at all exciting for me. And finding out the real Tyr is still alive and imprisoned in the realm is cool, but also that prison area is fairly small and navigating through it can be annoying as fuck. The first game's Niflheim side content has a more intriguing concept. Getting to rush into the poison mist maze where you're on a timer that's constantly decreasing, fighting your way through death traps and waves of enemies as fast as you can to loot the chests that they're blocking and increase the timer, gathering as many mist echoes you can find before the timer runs out and you lose all of them, trying to remember a way out. It's adrenaline inducing, a maze of absolute joy and frustration depending on which difficulty you're playing on. And that sense of urgency and excitement is even further heightened by stuffing one of the Valkyrie boss fights inside the maze. And on the topic of these beloved winged heroines, in my personal and pretty much objective opinion, they're much more aesthetically pleasing than a bunch of ugly undead Hulk monsters. There's just something so eerie and exciting about stumbling upon a Valkyrie just chilling there covering itself with its wings, compared to a poop-stained gravestone. Sure, there's a little satisfaction to be gained every time you get to insert your sword hilt into one of them, but call me crazy, I think the Valkyries offer a much greater incentive for insertion. Like the Valkyries, the Berserkers have sprayed themselves all over the world map, each sharing similar attack patterns with a unique twist for each of them. The hardest of them all being the times when you have to share an enclosed area with 2, even 3 at once, which to me was the only time where the difficulty started to rise, as I'm confident in my skill set. I can handle some one-on-one action, especially when my sparring partner is pulling out the same easily telegraphed moves I've already seen 1,000 times. But if you're someone who wants all the force and velocity of multiple sparring partners in one package, this game has you covered with the King Berserker and Gná, who I was calling Gina up until the point that I clapped them cheeks so hard Freya was like, enough, let me put her out of her misery. Both of these cats I fought on the second hardest difficulty without trying to stat boost my way to victory like a baby, and both respectively took me multiple tries to get the job done. With the King specifically, there was a try where I literally got him down to 1 fucking health, and the game was like, fuck you, you're not finished. But like all super hard bosses, it's still satisfying after many failed attempts to reach that climactic finish and say, ugh, it's over. What do we do now? If I were to compare the King versus Sigrun in the first game, I think it's once again just going to come down to aesthetics. Like the battlefield with Sigrun is super cool, having all the Valkyries you slaughtered all sitting in a circle waiting for you to get your ass kicked. The World Serpent even gets a front row seat. But yeah, I guess both bosses are equally hard in their own right, though the King took me a lot more tries and has more varied attacks, so if we're judging these bosses in terms of being bosses, he wins. But fuck it. Speaking of Sigrun, I can totally understand the complaint of Gná just being a carbon copy of her in Ragnarok. It is a little underwhelming that the hardest boss for your sequel is kind of the same fight for the most part. But the fact that we got the Berserkers and their King on top of her makes it forgivable. She also, like the King, has a wider variety of attacks, both up close and at range, some with Bifrost elements. Like every boss, she gets a charged up super you can break up with a shield strike, certain attacks that call for a specific arrow type to stop, which is a great way to make sure you don't forget to press square. And most of these attacks are either faster or harder to telegraph than Sigrun's, constantly chaining together different combos in different orders, and all with so much speed that you need a good 20 tries before you can read them as fast as you need to. Certain attacks that basically spell death on higher difficulties, where it all comes down to how fast you can read the attack that comes next. And by the time you're done with Gná, you won't have the slightest doubt where she comes from and what she's fighting for. Even when she's missing her dive bomb attack 3 to 6 times in a row, she will constantly remind you that even her failed attempts are for Asgard! For Asgard! For Asgard! Replacing the Valhalla from the first game. It's still the hardest attack to time your dodge with in the game, though I'd still say a dodge from the Muspelheim Valkyrie's version of the attack is the hardest one to time, period. Overall, the combat, the exploration, the pacing, the variety of all these things are all, like I said, vastly improved upon in the sequel. The feel for both games when it comes to combat is always incredibly satisfying. Every throw, slice, or slam of your axe, every stab, swing, or slam of your blades, every stab, swing, slice, slam down of your spear are all accompanied with weight, flawless animation, and pretty visual effects. And with the end of that sentence, it seems like I'm dipping into the graphics side of things, because I can't think of a better broad term to categorize the visuals. So with that, I guess the gameplay section of this video is as good as dead.
I'm coming to you!
Though I will resurrect it for a brief moment to say if you use resurrection stones, you're a fucking bitch. One aspect of the original game that did not need any improvement upon was the graphics. Both of these games are visually stunning, and offer a wide variety of locations, all bursting with detail. The first time I played God of War 1, I was immediately taken back by its wide variety of vibrant colors. Specifically, the first time you enter Freya's home, it felt like walking straight into a Disney movie. It doesn't matter what color you are, what realm you come from. Rest assured, these games will make sure your voice and vibrant nature will be heard. Maybe you're yellowish orange grass. Some people might associate that color of grass with being dead, unkempt, and disgusting. But God of War will bring out that beauty that we all know is hiding in there somewhere, and deliver a godly powered smack in the face to any who aren't woke to the idea of something being hideously grotesque and unwanted, yet still holding jaw-dropping beauty deep within. With each new realm comes a new variety of colors, beautiful architecture, towering monuments, cascading mountains, stunning skyboxes, breathtaking views, remnants of events that had taken place in the past or visions of the future, beautiful artwork illustrated into the walls, even the fucking shrines look cool and colorful. With every step you take, there is something new and interesting to see. Things in front of you, things behind you that you can see if you turn around, things in the distance begging to be explored, different perspectives of places you've already explored that are like, explore me again, please. Always incredibly detailed and adding more life and story to the environment. And just when you think you've seen it all, both of these games will pull the rug out from under you, or rather pull the curtain back just a little bit more, as some of the environments in these games will completely transform, making the exact location you previously explored into something completely different or much greater. And in the first game, it does this right off the bat. Who could forget meeting the World Serpent the first time and watching Atreus' eyes light up as the water drops and Tyr's temple rises to the surface? And it only gets better as you progress through the game, as the toilet continues to flush and no longer refill, considering the World Serpent takes gargantuan-sized shits. But it's all for the benefit of exploration, as it offers more and more areas to explore surrounding the lake. Even something as small as changing the color and brightness of the sky when Atreus gets sick. It's just another element used to suck you into whatever tone the game is trying to convey. And sometimes that tone is just, hey, this is fucking beautiful, isn't it? It brings a sense of wonder and joy that is indescribable. One of my fondest memories playing the first game was entering Alfheim for the first time, where it is quite literally a fucking Disney boat ride, where you're rowing your boat gently down the fucking stream to a barrage of tiny set pieces, setting the stage and giving a little story and history of the realm you just stepped into. Then giving you a where's my camera moment as the sky and entrance to the elf temple open up. It was gorgeous already with its heavenly Majin Buu pink skybox, but after you restore the light of Alfheim, it ditches the Pepto-Bismol for a little bit of Majin Blue gorgeousness. Yet another example of the current environment completely shifting because of your actions. And in the second game, they took this concept to a whole new level with Vanaheim, giving you the option to change the entire realm from day to night at your leisure. And it's not just as simple as pressing a button, taking a nap, and then waking up at a different time of day. You see it happen before your very eyes. Just one twirl of your magic green one-handed rolling pin, and instantly either Skull or Hottie comes dashing through the sky, splitting it in half, birthing a whole new world. But it really is a whole new world, as so many aspects of the environment change, and it's so cool how you can watch them change at the click of a button. The wildlife, the enemies you encounter, seeing the plants glow at nighttime, or new pathways being formed during the transition that surely at some point will confuse the fucking shit out of you and get you lost. Lost in the beauty of it, that is, of course. I know level design is something that could have been placed in the gameplay category, but who gives a fuck? Vanaheim is so massive. Even if the ability to change the time of day was absent, there is still so many different areas to explore, and they're all so fucking beautiful. Look at those rainbows. Like I mentioned in gameplay, just when you feel the already huge map that you were presented with in the middle of the game in Vanaheim was enough, by the time you get closer to the end game, you get access to the crater. And like I said, when you fill that hole with overflowing streams of liquid, it opens that hole even more. It even rightfully gives the map on the pause screen a complete makeover, showing the liquid you just sprayed all over it. I'm sitting here just dumbfounded, flabbergasted, and whatever other pretentious verbs I can pull out of my ass, that this is a single realm. Another realm worth noting for its massive amounts of diversity is the Dwarf realm. So many different areas to explore yet again. Beachy areas, the cute little dwarf villages, the gigantic mining factory-like area. When you first enter the village, it was so cool to finally see a realm with actual living people in it, something that was absent in the first game. You know, I don't know how to better describe any of this shit and drag it on further. All I can say is look at this shit. Look at me, walking slowly and epically showcasing these environments, putting in the man hours, no literally hours, of walking and piling up stacks of walking footage that won't be used unless I put a bunch on screen at the same time. All I can really say is appreciate the detail and variety of this shit over and over again. Another thing that the sequel does so well is revisiting realms previously explored from the first game, and showing how Ragnarok has made its impact on them. The Lake of Nine is now a fucking winter wonderland, as goes for Freya's house that unfortunately has said goodbye to its beautiful vibrant colors and passed them on to Vanaheim. Niflheim as well has undergone a completely icy makeover, and Muspelheim hasn't, though I must say that some of the views in the first game are slightly more beautiful. Again, I'm sitting here thinking, how the fuck do I explain this in further detail to fit in the massive amounts of gameplay footage I captured before I realized I was capturing way too fucking much. But to stop the flow of beautiful environment-fueled pre-cum, I'd like to transition the topic to the massive animals in these games. Yes, massive animals get a subcategory. Although it may seem a little sophomore to just gush over the fact that they're massive, like it's not just the size that counts, folks, but it's a little hard to ignore when they're detailed just like the world around them is so beautifully done. All the textures in their fur, scales, or amphibian skin are brimming with beautiful detail that bring more life to them. Massive size, beauty, oozing with personality. Starting to get jealous? Every time I left Midgard in the first game, I thought to myself, I can't wait to see that long, gigantic, girthy snake again, just chilling there, blessing the background without even having to fully stand up. Just think to yourself, the developers didn't need to have the gigantic snake chilling in the background, adding such a crucial set piece to the environment, but they did it anyway, because if you have size and beauty, why not flaunt it? One of my favorite moments in the first game was encountering the gigantic dragon. It just looked so cool. And in the second game, you fight a gigantic dog in Garm. Wow, look at that. Big fucking animals. But seriously, they unironically make everything feel grander in scale. And the attention to detail, like all the little individual scales and shit on the dragon, and also how realistic the doggo's nose looks in Ragnarok, these are things that make me grin from cheek to cheek. And it's worth giving these things some praise from the perspective of someone who doesn't have the slightest fucking clue how they're made. This level of detail can be praised without every buzzword in the book being used to make me seem smart. Awesome, beautiful, cool. Another aspect of the visuals that does a lot to make moment-to-moment gameplay more exciting is the lighting. Seeing light piercing through the crevices of whatever is blocking it, the glaring light just waiting for you to walk through and reveal the next environment, the way light reflects off of characters and their armor/weapons in cutscenes or in gameplay, how it's used to bring a little epicness into scenes, like in the beginning of the first game with Kratos standing in the doorway. There's tons of detail on the weapons and armor. All the little indentations and marks on the axe and blades, sometimes showing the signs of wear or blood from enemies, like the first time you meet Sindri. God, how I wish you never had to upgrade the blades to get more skills in both games, as I love seeing the Chaos blades all worn and rusted. The sequel also ditches the god-awful auras surrounding certain weapon handles. There were never deal breakers, and some I actually like the shock aura, as it's a little more subtle than the rest, but they for the most part just look like shit or were distracting, in my opinion. Another thing that is masterfully done is the cinematography, as well as the facial animations of all the characters. When all the elements you have to make a good game are working as a cohesive unit and are all done so spectacularly, it amplifies all of them individually. When characters' facial animations do a good job at conveying the emotions that a good actor who's already doing a great job conveying those emotions in their line delivery, it makes things so much more real and engaging. Then when it's accompanied with great camera work, close-ups when they're necessary, having other characters in the background who aren't even talking, just using their body language to further establish a good scene, it becomes surreal. The camera work does a lot to amplify the world itself as well. Like I mentioned before, the first meeting, or really any meeting with the World Serpent, how the camera will glue you to the best possible point of view when entering new areas. The cutscene where you're introduced to realm travel, seeing all the colors of each realm lighting up, introducing you to the wonder that comes with traveling to different worlds, each of them carrying their own distinct personality. How this is done in Ragnarok when Galahorn is blown, bringing back the life and color into them that was shrouded in darkness throughout the entire game. The World Tree in all its beauty, seeing a greater perspective of it in Ragnarok at Sindri's house. Even the time when you're traveling between realms, it's gorgeous to look at. When that light-fueled portal opens up and offers a beautiful transition from World Tree to New Realm. It's just so seamless. During gameplay, one thing I love is the way the camera follows you when you're climbing, sliding through a small space between two walls, or crouch walking underneath some shit. The animations in the first game, whenever you're opening up a massive door, it always feels like a natural transition into a cutscene, which is so satisfying in moment-to-moment gameplay because everything feels so much more cinematic. The magic used by companions to interact with the environment or to solve puzzles, open new pathways and doors, all the intricate details and the prophecies behind the giant shrines. Everything is consistently beautiful and deserves a massive amount of appreciation. And the combat does a great job of maintaining the spectacle. So many times whenever I'm in the middle of a mob fight, it feels like a fucking light show. The way the blades and axe shine when you've built them up to a short power buff, all the colors and effects tied to enemy attacks, the enemies themselves, the dragon soaring through the sky in Vanaheim, your runic attacks, even the goddamn colored rings like when you get a prompt to do a shield strike or parry an attack add to the spectacle of it. Your companion's attacks throwing even more colorful, cool-looking shit on the battlefield. Angraboda's basic attacks are just her literally throwing fucking rainbows of smoke bombs all over the place. Freya can summon a mini electric fireworks show at the click of a button. There's a ton more examples, but I can't just sit here showing clip after clip of gameplay footage and just saying, hey, that looks cool. I don't need to fucking tell you that, you already know. But I'll just say one more tiny thing and mention the remnants of Asgard that look so cool I didn't want to fucking beat them. Just mini Northern Lights areas scattered all over the place. But anyway, the only instance where the game goes a little overboard, talking about Ragnarok, is when it channels its inner Ghost of Tsushima and adds a fucking boatload of particle effects in places where they aren't needed, in my opinion. Certain areas just have shit flying all over the place, like there's some hidden creature in the sky pouring gigantic bowls of leaves and burnt debris everywhere you walk. It doesn't look terrible, it's just sometimes it's completely unnecessary. Like, where is this shit coming from? Overall, like I said, there isn't much to say, other than to point at shit and say it looks good. I'm not some fucking graphic designer that can break down all this shit in explicit detail, I can just tell you how it added to the experience for me personally. And the same applies to the music and sound design in these games. I thought it was appropriate to bundle these with the graphics, as they are again something in the first game that didn't call for me thinking, imagine if this was better. Both games have fantastic sound design, all the sounds coming out of the current weapon you're using, runic attacks, the sound of your weapons tearing through flesh and bone, being thrown or recalled. This isn't sound design, but all the loud screams from Kratos when he's executing the attacks, the gong from perfect parries, the sounds of magic in and out of cutscenes, specifically in the realm travel room. There's just so many different moving pieces in terms of sound that bring it all to life. Both soundtracks are fan-fucking-tastic, though if we're keeping score and staying true to the title of this video, Ragnarok wins. But a strong argument can be made that a big reason for that is because of the story and gameplay being expanded upon. The stakes are higher, the first game has already established a foundation for some of the main themes in our heads, so any music accompanying all the stronger acting performances, story beats, or fights with more widely known Norse gods can seem much louder. But that doesn't mean the first game's soundtrack doesn't hit just as hard. I actually prefer the first game's version of Faye's theme over Ragnarok's. But on the topic of character themes, I love how every one of them in both games can have such distinctly different sounds and melodies, yet feel so ingrained with one another. It's a tall task that's overlooked by the general gaming community. Being able to make a soundtrack for a game that can mentally transport you to all the different realms you travel to, take you across a variety of tonal shifts and still maintain the same feel that you aren't playing a different game. These games serve as an even greater example of this, when the main theme surrounding everything is so basic. Being able to take 3 simple notes and use them in a variety of ways based on the current tone is incredibly impressive. Every time the main theme would quietly sneak into gameplay segments, it'd get me increasingly more pumped up. There's even instances in the combat where character themes are combined based on who's in your party. Like in Vanaheim, because it's Freya's home realm, the music is structured around her theme. But because Brock is the one fighting alongside Kratos in the beginning, you can hear him and Sindri's theme creeping in. And in terms of how the music plays such an integral role in establishing the tones of any given situation, and speaking of Brock, his death scene is a great example. The music starts off like a redemption track for Tyr, him finally rising up and doing something that's actually helpful for the team. The music makes it seem like they're finally on the cusp of having a true advantage against Odin, and it's time for their ultimate triumph. Then, when Brock starts confronting Tyr, the music starts turning into a mysterious but not completely ominous tone. Then after Odin stabs Brock and reveals himself, the music slaps you with some "holy fuck, shit just got real" loud trumpets, and quickly shifts to the Hand of Odin theme that is used for Thor as well in tense moments. Then another shift in tone as Freya and Sindri are tending to Brock, and the music basically clues you in that Brock is dead before he actually dies. And finally finishing off with a very slow and sad version of Brock and Sindri's theme. Everything just fits so perfectly and translates the emotions that are meant to be felt. And there are many more examples of this that I love. The little riff/motif that's played when Kratos and Atreus meet Thor and he's walking towards their front door. That same one being used when you first meet Heimdall, helping to maintain the tension as he's hanging Atreus off the giant wall. Just a nice little sinister track. Or when Thor's music kicks in when Heimdall pisses him off.
And how do you intend to stop me?
Look into my eyes. You tell me.
Again, that Hand of Odin theme creeping in just for a brief moment. It fits so well with the scene, just that tiny little build to remind you that Thor is not to be fucked with. I also love how during his fight with Kratos, some of the cutscene fighting in between gameplay is perfectly synced with the music. This is the type of shit that adds a lot to the experience for me. I love the music that plays when you first enter the home of the Norns. That was the first instance where we got a track that truly feels so separated from everything else, but in a good way, because it's like you're stepping into a world that's intentionally meant to be locked away. It's also where we once again have the main theme bleeding in as the Norns tell Kratos he's going to die. The arrogance in which they say it, along with the frustration of Kratos and him seeming to believe in what they're saying, is complemented with some beautiful yet subtly ominous strings that set the tone perfectly. Like I mentioned before, the music when Atreus and Angrboda are racing, Atreus' theme, which is incorporated in a variety of ways throughout the game, just like Kratos. His theme is coincidentally the 3 notes used in Kratos' theme, only backwards. In both games, how the themes for the death of the main villains feels like less of a triumph over evil, and more like just an unfortunate circumstance of them refusing not to be evil. The Dwarf Realm music providing a nice little change of pace, and of course what is now one of my favorite tracks in all of gaming, Rabe's Lament. I love how the composer of all this great music, Bear McCreary, was literally in the game as a dwarf playing the song. It's just such a fantastic touch. That camera shot of him behind Kratos was just perfect, and that he's what further brought his emotions and journey to life, speaking for him through his music, the voice behind the voice, so to speak. I really can't pull out all the jokes with the soundtrack and say, oh, the fucking dwarf songs make me want to cut my height in half, grab a tiny wooden mug and forge a hammer and start skipping around a fucking fireplace. No, I want to cry and admire how good this shit is. It's one aspect of games that I unfortunately take seriously, and that is the thing that sticks with me the most, as evident by its heavy inclusion in this review. Like I said, it's an incredibly underrated thing in gaming, just how hard it is to have music that perfectly coincides with the game's story, setting, and combat. Tracks that after finishing a game can still transport me to every realm, cutscene, or fight without me having to turn on my PlayStation. Music that can transcend the game itself and be a great listen when you're just chilling out. I can sit back, listen to a track, and reflect on the fun, emotional roller coasters these games took me on. So with that, let's reflect. I think it's fair to say if you've been tallying up scores and listening to me repeat myself 1,000 times in this double review, that Ragnarok basically trumps the original game in almost every aspect. But through this video, I gained a much greater appreciation for the foundation that was laid out in God of War 1. While I said I didn't see it as a triumphant victory, it plays a crucial role in one, with Ragnarok being the proof of how close it truly was to being perfect, how short of a climb to the top of the mountain it would be. What makes a good sequel? Is simply being a better game regardless of where you take it all that matters? Fuck no. It's about taking every facet of your story, gameplay, graphics, music, etc., and building upon all of them. And that makes God of War Ragnarok a perfect example of exactly what a sequel should be. An absolute gift of a game that's wrapped up not just this chapter in the series, but the entire franchise tightly with a nice little bow. To the point that a new installment actually doesn't seem necessary. It justifies the shift away from the tone and core gameplay mechanics of the original trilogy, and brings us the best game of the entire series, and one of the greatest games of all time. If you like this, leave a like, comment, and perhaps subscribe, and I just might make some more. Why, hello there. If you made it through the entire video and enjoyed yourself, I'd like to extend the most insincere thanks. Or if you made it to the end and I bored the living shit out of you, I'd like to say, I am deeply sorry. In all seriousness, this is a project that took an insane amount of time and effort from me, and I hope that's reflected in it. To give you a greater perspective of that hard work, multiple playthroughs of both games, constantly going back through the first game to capture footage which is extremely fucking annoying given there are limited save slots. Revisiting certain cutscenes or gameplay 1,000 times to capture footage with the music or sound effects off so that everything's seamless with like the music in the background during the video. Going through literally every single released and unreleased track in the game for use in the video so I can find out what is the perfect track for what I'm talking about, or at least what will fit with like the tone and momentum and the way I'm fucking presenting shit. Redoing the entire intro to avoid copyright. You know, I was fighting with myself back and forth of whether or not I wanted to just leave the original intro the way it was and like, no, fuck it, I'm getting zero money off of this. And then I thought, well, I mean, 4 months of fucking hard work and constant revisings of this fucking script and the hours put into freaking footage and blah, 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 blah. If the video blew up and it did well and I got like literally nothing from it other than some, you know, views, or maybe some new subscribers, I'd feel like a complete fucking idiot. So, the original intro I'll leave in the comment section. And it's worth a watch because it is fucking a lot better. Almost killing my laptop with 200 plus gigabytes, well maybe more like 300 plus gigabytes of footage I was working with. Almost losing the entire fucking video at times. Like literally I got to the point where it's like I loaded up one of the freaking files, or like the save file, and it just wouldn't process any of the fucking clips, and I was like, all my hard drive space, everything was down to 0, and I kept on like clearing the cache, but it kept on fucking just decreasing. It was insane. Trying to edit the living shit out of the video to give the full perspective of what I'm talking about, instead of just one long, lazy, random, unrelated gameplay clip, which is a style that like most freaking YouTubers use nowadays, and one I will adopt shortly, because this was a fucking train wreck. It is hard with like a shitty little laptop to produce like really fucking good content and not have your fucking computer about to explode. Like I said, multiple revisions of the script. The first one I was so disappointed in that I put myself through a week-long depression and considered just giving up and never reviewing the games. Quitting YouTube entirely even. Now I'm not here to be a fucking mopey little pussy, that's my own fault for trying to be a perfectionist. But it's just something that's worth mentioning considering after all that, my vision and my video came to fruition. And maybe you're somebody sitting there thinking, wow, it was all for nothing. Why aren't you complaining about shit nonstop? Why aren't you summing up your thoughts in an easily digestible 15 to 30 minutes instead of going through the entire fucking story of both games over the course of an hour? Why aren't you whining over the Angraboda section and how it ruined the fucking game? Look, I made this video to showcase what these games mean to me. Not for clicks or to engage in some fucking discussion with a bunch of dingbat pieces of shit. This is about love and attention to detail. I also made it to showcase what this channel means to me. A little over a year ago, for the millionth time, I reinvented my YouTube channel with a new style and writing approach. And my very first video was the God of War Ragnarok trailer sucks video. A funny little parody review that I thought could help me capitalize on some clicks and maybe gain me some channel notoriety. With that video, I found a groove in my writing and delivery. And while the channel hasn't grown much since then, thanks to laziness and an unwillingness to endlessly surf the waves of trend, I've grown. More experienced, a little bit more mature, I guess. And when I considered hanging up the YouTube boots because I want to pursue a career in voice acting, I thought it was only fitting to come full circle from beginning to end with a massive God of War Ragnarok review. My swan song, if you will. While this is likely not the end, it is the turning point, a new chapter in the saga of my content creation, where I strive to be unapologetically me, and don't give a fuck if you like, comment, and perhaps subscribe. I might make some more anyway. So thank you, and fuck you kindly. And also check out my Give Me God of War playthroughs for both games that'll be out in the near future. Hopefully. Bye.